Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere most history books don't dare to go, down the worn cobblestone alleys and behind the heavy wooden doors of the Ottoman Empire, where the lives of women forgotten by time flicker in candlelight. You're about to walk into the heart of 16th century Istanbul, and honestly you probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, though it is, but because the smells alone might knock you out. Roasted lamb on one corner, raw sewage on the next. One wrong turn and you're either being serenaded by a street musician or being pickpocketed by a 10-year-old who looks like he's never blinked. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to guilt trip you into it. Just vibes. Oh, and drop your city and the time down in the comments. I love knowing who's listening and what kind of insomnia we're dealing with. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's night in the capital of the Ottoman Empire, and the moon floats like a silver coin above the domes and minarets of Istanbul. You're wearing sandals a bit too thin for these streets, and every step sends a shock up your spine. The air is thick with smoke and perfume, rosewater and garlic. The call to prayer is long over, but the city is still buzzing, just not in the respectable parts. You've arrived in the district the maps won't name. Nobody draws it out loud, but everyone knows where it is. To your left, a caravan of camels groans under the weight of spices and silks. To your right, a woman leans against a pillar, dressed in a way that's both modest and unmistakable. Her veil is sheer, her gaze direct, and the tilt of her hip says more than 1,000 sermons ever could. She's not alone. The alley opens up like a cracked mirror, showing you flickers of women in every doorway, all bathed in the same golden torchlight as if someone spilled honey down the street. You're not here to judge, you're here to understand. You duck beneath an awning that smells like cardamom and old wine. The people around you speak in hushed Turkish, Arabic, Greek, Armenian, a babble of languages stewed together over centuries of empire. One man laughs too loudly, another adjusts his robe nervously. They all pretend not to look at the women. The women pretend not to see them. But everything here is theatre. The brothel, if you can call it that, is hidden inside what looks like a crumbling hammam. The front has long since been repurposed, probably into a tailor's shop or a coffee house that only serves wine, but the back still holds its secrets. You're ushered in by an old woman whose fingers are stained with henna and tobacco. She doesn't ask your name, only whether you have money. When you nod, she smiles with exactly 3 teeth. The inside smells of cloves and ash. The floors creak, and the walls are painted with fading frescoes of birds and gardens. Once, this was a place of rest and purification. Now, it's just quiet, except for the low sound of someone humming a lullaby in another room. A woman walks past you in a red sash, subtle but deliberate. In some quarters, red means you're married. Here, it means something else entirely. This is where you meet Layla. She's not the youngest woman in the room, not the oldest either. Her eyes are tired but sharp, like she's memorized the shape of every man's soul and knows exactly how ugly it gets. She sits cross-legged on a cushion, mending the hem of her dress with a needle so fine you can barely see it. She doesn't look up until you're right in front of her. "You lost?" she asks, in Turkish laced with something older, Persian maybe, or grief. You shake your head. "Then sit down," she says, so you do. Layla pours you a cup of something warm and bitter. Not quite coffee, not quite wine, probably both. She says nothing for a while, just watches you. Finally she sighs and says, "You're not a client. You've got too much guilt in your face. Scholars have the same eyes." You almost laugh. She's not wrong. She begins to speak, not about herself, not yet, but about the city. Istanbul, she says, is a hungry thing. It devours everything, cultures, people, ideas, and especially women. You come here thinking you're free, and then you realise you're just part of its stomach. You either learn to digest, or you get digested. A fact? Sure. Here's one. By the mid-1500s, Istanbul had more than 50 known brothels, even though prostitution was technically illegal. But here's the trick. The ban only applied if someone complained. If no one did, it wasn't really a crime, like jaywalking but with way more eyeliner. Fringe fact? The Sultan's court once tried to ban sex workers from wearing red shoes because it tempted the righteous. Naturally, the next week, half the city was walking around in crimson slippers just to prove a point. And the debate? Scholars still argue whether the Ottoman authorities tolerated prostitution out of pragmatism or moral laziness. Some say it was a necessary evil. an open secret that kept order. Others insist it was just plain hypocrisy with a good PR team. But no one can quite agree where the line was drawn because the empire itself never drew it clearly. Layla reaches for a fig from a chipped bowl and bites into it slowly, eyes closed. "I've seen Janissaries cry like babies," she says. "I've seen Pashas leave love poems under pillows. Doesn't matter their rank. They all want the same thing, to be seen, even if it's only for an hour." Outside, a dog howls. Somewhere far away, a muezzin calls the faithful to prayer again. The echo bounces off the stone walls, falling like soft rain. Layla doesn't flinch. She just sighs and says, "Time to light the lamps." And just like that, night in the Empire deepens. You wake slowly the next evening, wrapped in the sour, sweet smell of rose oil and damp wool. The cushion beneath you is flat and scratchy. Your neck aches from the strange angle you slept in, and somewhere nearby, someone is laughing, too loud, too sharp, like they're trying to hide something. Outside, the city hums with its usual rhythm, but in here, the tempo is slower, like the seconds stretch a little more inside these walls. You blink until the shapes become clearer. Wooden beams above, a low-burning oil lamp. The same frescoed walls with birds that seem to fly even when you're not watching. The old woman who runs this place, her name might be Zenep, or maybe she just gave you the name to shut you up, is shuffling down the hall, her slippers scuffing against the stone floor. She's muttering to herself probably about the missing jar of olives she accused the laundry girl of stealing earlier. In reality, she probably ate them herself and forgot. Memory is as fragile here as reputation. You stretch and move toward the front, slipping past girls already fixing their hair in tarnished mirrors, cheeks flushed with beetroot paste and eyes darkened with coal. They don't talk much this early. That comes later, once the clients arrive and the masks go on. Right now, everything is quiet labour, tying sashes, checking for lice, dabbing perfume in places most men will never see. Outside, you return to the maze. The city seems to be designed by someone with a deep hatred for straight lines and logic. Every turn leads to another market, another alley, another man trying to sell you something you didn't ask for. Eventually you reach the heart of it, the stalls of the Grand Bazaar where real trade hides in plain sight. Silks, spices, boots, jewels, all legal, all taxed, but beneath every respectable merchant is a side hustle, and some of those trades can't be listed on ledgers. The Ottoman Empire is obsessed with regulation, decrees, registers, inspectors, but when it comes to the sex trade, everything lives in this foggy grey zone. The law says prostitution is forbidden. The same law, however, recognises houses of ill repute as taxable property. See the contradiction? That's the want. You talk to a man named Samil, he sells rugs during the day, but everyone knows his real income comes from managing 2 houses in the Galata district. He grins as he leans on a bale of wool and says, "They make the laws, we find the corners." Then he offers to sell you a cat. You decline, and he shrugs. And this is the shadow economy, hidden in plain view, right beside the spice jars and silk rolls. It's a mirror of the legitimate world, just dustier. Pimping is called managing. Brothels are guest houses. Sex workers, sometimes they're called artists, sometimes maids, sometimes nothing at all. By the 17th century, the imperial court had perfected a kind of doublethink. Moral edicts were issued publicly. Prostitutes were to be banished, their clothes burned, their madams flogged. But just a few blocks away, taxes were quietly collected from the very same women. How? Because the inspectors didn't ask questions they didn't want answers to. If a woman worked in a guest house and gave a portion of her earnings to the local janissary captain, no one bothered her. But if she got too loud, too proud, or too poor, suddenly the law remembered she existed. Here's a historical tidbit. In 1583, an imperial edict demanded the banishment of all prostitutes from Istanbul. Just 3 weeks later, a city magistrate ordered new licenses for entertainment houses. It's the legal equivalent of putting out a fire with wine and calling it holy water. Fringe fact? Some women would pretend to be prostitutes just to access certain legal protections. Prostitution was illegal, sure, but it was also policed, which meant if you lived under that category, at least someone might notice if you disappeared. There's still debate about how big this underground economy really was. Some scholars believe it was massive, thousands of women operating across the empire, from port cities to rural provinces. Others argue that the numbers were much smaller, and it's just the scandal that inflated the narrative. But let's be honest, no empire this vast ever keeps its vices tidy. Back at Layla's house, business is starting to pick up. You return just in time to see a man slip in, clearly trying not to be seen. He's dressed like a merchant, but everything about him screams bureaucrat. He walks like someone who signs documents all day and thinks flirtation is just another transaction. Layla sees him before you do. Her posture shifts, not in fear, not in submission, but in calculation. This is a returning client, someone with connections, and that makes him both valuable and dangerous. She greets him with a cool nod. No warmth. That's part of the game. Warmth costs extra. You watch them talk for a few minutes. It's like a script they both know. He complains about the weight of office. She makes a joke about his wife's perfume. He doesn't laugh, but he smiles. That's enough. Eventually they disappear into a side room, and the curtain swings slowly behind them like it's hiding something shameful or sacred. Outside, the city glows in oil lamp gold. A street singer wails a love song that probably once made sense but now just sounds like longing. A child chases a dog down the road, laughing too hard. Somewhere, a mosque door creaks open for night prayers, and someone else is turned away from a Mayhane for not paying their tab. Back inside, you catch sight of the younger girls, some barely women, watching the older ones like they're watching a play. They're trying to learn the rules before it's their turn. Layla emerges, eventually, smoothing her hair like nothing happened. But her eyes look heavier than before. She sits beside you again and says, "You ever notice how this city makes a business of pretending? Everyone wears a mask, not just us." And as she peels an orange with a knife that's a little too sharp for comfort, you wonder how many truths have been sliced up and served sweet here. How many lives folded into this economy of shadows? The rug merchant, the tax collector, the preacher sneaking in after dark. They're all part of the same machine. Some feed it, some get crushed beneath it. And the women? They're not the cogs. They're the oil that keeps it running. You find Layla in the courtyard the next day, hunched over a cracked basin, washing her undergarments in silence. Her sleeves are rolled up, revealing arms marked not just by time but by labour, and maybe a little war. Her hair, usually coiled and tucked beneath a scarf, now hangs in strands, damp from the morning's drizzle. You don't speak right away. She doesn't look up. The only sound is the rhythmic slosh of water and the quiet squawk of pigeons bickering over bread crusts on the wall. After a while she says, "They always think we cry afterward. We don't. Most of the time we just wash." You sit beside him, the stone cold beneath you. The courtyard is small, hemmed in by walls patched with plaster and ivy. A single fig tree leans crookedly in the corner, leaves slick and trembling. Somewhere above, a window slams shut, maybe from a gust of wind, maybe someone listening too closely. In this house, privacy is an illusion, like purity or promises. You ask Layla how she came here. Her laugh is short and bitter. How does anyone? Starvation, betrayal, or love? Turns out me, her story isn't all that unique. A girl from a village near Erzurum, sold by her uncle after a bad harvest. She thought she was being sent to work in a wealthy household. She was, just not as a maid. That first year was a blur, she says. Pain, learning how to act like she chose this life and understanding the game before it chewed her up. She was lucky. She had a madam who didn't beat the girls too often, and an older woman who taught her how to protect herself, not with knives, but with smiles and silence. There's no paperwork for women like Layla. No records, no tombstones waiting with their names. Most never learn to write. A few memorize the Quran just enough to recite the parts that sound like freedom, or maybe just forgiveness. But there's no official legacy here, nothing you can find in archives. Just rumours, oral histories, and the bones they leave behind. She tells you about other women, friends, enemies, sisters in survival. There was Malik, who spoke 6 languages and swore she once danced for a Venetian ambassador. There was Farah, who'd been born in the harem and expelled for reasons no one dared ask. And there was Zubaida, the girl who vanished after biting a janissary who tried to take more than he paid for. Layla says Zubaida's ghost still walks the upper floors sometimes. You laugh. She doesn't. The night comes in soft, cloudy. Candles flicker behind stained glass windows. You follow Layla to a different house this time. Across the district, smaller, less grand, but somehow cleaner. The air smells like lavender and starch. This house is run by a woman named Huriye, older than anyone else in the business, with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that have seen the rise and fall of at least 3 sultans. She sizes you up the moment you walk in. You writing a book or looking for company? She asks Chas. You tell her neither. Then you'll get in the way. But she lets you stay. She always does. Everyone wants someone to listen, even if they pretend they don't. This house runs differently. No screaming, no drunkards pounding at the door. Hurier only takes clients with references. Diplomats, wealthy merchants, scholars with clean fingernails, and secrets they're willing to pay to keep hidden. The girls here wear cleaner silks, speak better Turkish, some can read. Some have jewellery they bought themselves. But don't mistake it for freedom. It's just a better cage. You meet one of the younger women, Aylin. She can't be older than 17, with skin like warm cream and a nervous twitch in her fingers. She fidgets with her anklet as she talks, a small gold chain with a blue bead threaded through it. That's for the evil eye, she says, so it doesn't touch my soul, and she says she's from Thessaloniki. Her family thought she was married off to a rich man in Edirne. She doesn't think they'll ever find out otherwise. You ask her if she wants to leave. I don't even know where I'd go. She's quiet for a moment, then asks if you've seen the Bosphorus at night. It's the only thing that makes me feel real, she whispers. Here's a historical thread. Many of these women were brought in under the guise of domestic work or concubinage. The border between those roles and prostitution was tissue thin, especially for non-Muslim women, Greek, Armenian, Slavic girls who lacked legal protection under Sharia. They were the easiest to traffic, the easiest to replace, and the easiest to forget. A fringe detail? Some brothels used to stage elaborate theatre shows, private performances for clients, music, poetry, even shadow puppets, art as foreplay. Occasionally the sex never happened. The men just wanted to watch something beautiful move in front of them and pretend it was for them alone. There's scholarly disagreement about how widespread these brothels truly were. Some claim only a handful existed officially, operating under medical supervision by the 19th century. Others insist hundreds thrived in every major city, hidden behind shopfronts and euphemisms. The truth, like most things in empires, lies somewhere between what was said and what was tolerated. Later, back at Layla's place, you hear the sound of arguing through the paper-thin walls. One of the girls didn't get paid. The man left early. Someone's threatening to call the guard, which is laughable. No one calls the guard. The guard sometimes shows up just to collect his cut. You sit outside on the steps, beside Layla. She's smoking something strong and clove-scented, the smoke curling around her like a veil. She exhales and says, "Everyone thinks we're victims or seductresses, but most days we're just workers with sore feet." And you realise she's right. This isn't some grand tragedy or exotic fantasy. It's labour. Messy, dangerous, underpaid labour. Like coal mining. Just less soot, more makeup. She offers you the pipe. You decline. "Your loss," she says, and leans back watching the stars like they owe her something. In the distance you hear the faint sound of drums, some wedding, some festival. Joy happening somewhere else and for someone else. In this corner of the empire, the work goes on, the water is boiled, the coins are counted, and the lamps are lit. And the women keep showing up, night after night, pretending none of it touches their soul. You're starting to realise that in the Ottoman Empire, law isn't exactly law. It's more like a shifting curtain, transparent when convenient, opaque when someone wants you gone. The thing about prostitution in this place and time is that it lives in a kind of legal twilight. One moment it's condemned by the religious decree, the next it's being taxed by the very state that pretends to ban it. It's not hypocrisy, not exactly. It's strategy. It's control. It's the kind of rule that thrives on selective enforcement. If they can always arrest you, then you're always obedient. Tonight, you find yourself inside a smoky tavern turned coffee house. It serves neither coffee nor clarity. It's tucked behind a shoemaker's stall in the Eminönü district, and the air inside is a soupy mix of tobacco, sweat, and something fermented that was probably wine 5 weeks ago. The lanterns flicker weakly, casting dancing faryas on the wooden beams above. You're here because Layla said you need to see how the other half gets their pleasure. Off the books, off the record, and occasionally off their minds. In the back of the room, half hidden behind a woven curtain, there's a small alcove where 3 women sit with fake smiles and heavy coal giggling into the cups of wine they're not supposed to be drinking. One of them catches your eye. Not because she's the prettiest, but because she looks bored. Like she's read this script 1,000 times and knows exactly when to laugh. Her name's Fatma. And she used to be a laundress in Topkapi Palace. Then she got caught in a scandal involving a jealous concubine and a spilled bottle of rosewater. Now she tells fortunes and sells dreams in 5-minute increments. You sit across from her and she offers to read your palm. You say sure, mostly out of curiosity. Her hands are rough but warm. She traces your lifeline and raises an eyebrow. "You're not from here," she says. You nod. "You won't stay long," she adds. Probably true. You think you're studying us, but we're studying you. Okay, that one hits a little harder than expected. She pours you a drink, something dark and bitter, and begins to talk about the laws. Not the kind in books, the real laws, the ones whispered from madame to girl, from alley to bathhouse. How to spot a guard in plain clothes, how to spot a client who won't pay, and how to disappear for 3 nights without raising suspicion, how to slip your coin purse into your shoe because waist sashes are too easy to cut. There's an actual law, imperial decree from the 1500s, that outlines punishments for public indecency, including exile, flogging, and public shaming. But in practice, those only happened when someone powerful wanted to make an example. Most of the time, the laws weren't about stopping prostitution, they were about reminding everyone who had the right to do what, and to whom. Historical fact. In 1564, a judge in Istanbul recorded a case where a brothel was raided not because it existed, but because one of the girls was Muslim and her client wasn't. That was the scandal, not the act, but the mixing of religious lines. You start to understand it wasn't morality they were protecting, it was hierarchy. Fringe detail? Some sex workers paid bribes directly to religious officials, small donations to keep the sermons vague and the guards away. There were even rumours of imams frequenting the very houses they condemned on Fridays. Whether true or not, the gossip was enough to make the girls laugh over their tea, even if it was the kind of laugh that curdled just beneath the surface. Debate-wise, scholars still can't agree how much autonomy these women had. Some say they were enslaved, trafficked, coerced at every level. Others argue that many chose this work. If choice can exist when the alternative is starvation, widowhood, or a forced marriage to a man 3 decades older, maybe both are true, maybe neither. Fatma lights a small clove cigarette and leans back, balancing on one leg of the stool. "You think we're sad," she says, "but sadness doesn't feed you. Sadness doesn't get you a warm room in winter." She gestures to the curtain. "Out there, they act like we're poison. In here, they beg us to pretend they matter." You thank her and leave a few coins on the table. She doesn't look at them, probably already knows good what they are just by the sound they made hitting the wood. Back in the street, the city feels strangely alive, like the buildings are breathing. Istanbul after dark has its own rhythm, one that pulses in time with the footsteps of the desperate and the powerful. A man with a lute plays a mournful tune near a fountain. A woman in green silk walks alone, her veil pulled low, but not quite low enough to avoid 100 eyes. A boy chases a hoop down the hill, laughing into the wind. Life goes on, indifferent to legality. You return to Layla's and find the girls all gathered in the main room, eating from a communal dish of rice and stewed eggplant. They pass around a small jar of pomegranate molasses, dipping flatbread into it between bites. One of the younger girls, maybe 13, is being taught how to walk soft, how to enter a room without being noticed until she wants to be. It's a game. It's also survival. Layla sits near the window, smoking again, her eyes fixed on the distant dome of a mosque glowing in the moonlight. You sit beside her, and for a while neither of you speak. Then she says, "We used to be legal. Centuries ago, courtesans, dancers, consorts. Then they decided to save our souls by erasing our names." You nod. "Funny thing is," she adds, "they still need us, even when they pretend we're not here." And in that moment, surrounded by the soft rustle of silk, the clink of coins and the sound of water being poured into clay cups, you realise something unsettling. The empire isn't built in its palaces. It's built in these back rooms, behind drawn curtains, in the spaces no one wants to admit exist, and the women, they're not just surviving it, they're holding it up. The coffee houses of Istanbul are not just places to sip bitter brew and complain about taxes. They're arenas. They're confessionals. They're smoke-thicked theatres where men sit elbow to elbow and pretend not to notice each other's secrets. You walk into one just after sundown, drawn by the clatter of dice and the low, urgent rhythm of oud strings coming from somewhere near the back. A cloud of tobacco smoke hits you in the face like a silk curtain soaked in molasses. Inside, it's warm and golden and already loud. Everyone here is performing. The merchants boast about caravans that didn't exist. The students pretend they're revolutionaries. The imams quote verses they don't follow. And the men? The men talk about women they've never touched, or did, but want you to believe they didn't. There's an art to it, just enough detail to seem real, just enough vagueness to escape judgment. You settle into a corner and sip something that burns a little on the way down. It's definitely not coffee. The cup wobbles slightly in your hand as a group of men next to you start discussing the problem of women walking unaccompanied in the market. One of them, with a face like a damp walnut, claims it's a sign of moral decay. Another shakes his head, leans in, and with a chuckle says, "You know who's the worst? The ones with the red shoes." Ah, the red shoes again. You've heard that phrase whispered with amusement, disgust, desire, and fear. Red shoes mean different things depending on the street, the hour, and who's watching. In theory, prostitutes aren't supposed to exist. In practice, everyone talks about them, especially in the places like this, where real names are forgotten the moment they're spoken. The conversation turns into a kind of half-drunken oral history. Each man adds his own tale of an encounter. One swears he saw a courtesan turn down a vizier because her price was higher than his honour. Another describes a girl so beautiful that men fought duels over her in the graveyard behind Ayat Mosque. They talk as if these women are both myth and memory, creatures of silk and sin who drift through the city like perfume. But none of them speak about what happens after. After the doors close, after the coins are spent. What happens when the girl has a fever? When her tooth aches? When her client is violent and nobody cares? You glance around and realise something. All these men live in a world that only includes these women when it's convenient. In their stories, the women don't get endings, just exits. There's a historical truth buried in this, though it's murky. Coffee houses in the Ottoman Empire were often the centre of male society, spaces where women were excluded, except when they weren't. Because some of these establishments, particularly in Galata or along the waterfront, were fronts for brothels or places where sex workers passed through discreet and quick. You could order tea, smoke opium, and then disappear upstairs without anyone blinking, as long as you were discreet, as long as you didn't embarrass anyone. Fringe fact. In 17th century Istanbul, there was an official ban on musical instruments in coffee houses, especially those favoured by women performers. The authorities claimed it was to prevent moral collapse, but everyone knew it was a thinly veiled attack on the houses where music, dancing, and other pleasures blurred together. If you saw a tambourine behind the counter, you weren't there for caffeine. And here's the debate. Were these coffee houses harmless escapes, or the nerve centres of underground vice? Some scholars claim they were revolutionary places, where men of different classes mingled, where poetry flowed and political dissent quietly brewed. Others say that's romantic nonsense, that they were just meat markets with nicer rugs. Back in the house, Layla listens to you recount the evening and snorts. Men talk about us like we're ghosts, but they keep coming back hoping to be haunted. She's sharpening a long hairpin with a whetstone as she says this. You give her a look. "It's for my hair," she says, deadpan. "And maybe someone's eye." You're beginning to realise how much of this world runs on rumour. A single word can mark a woman. One look too long in the bazaar and suddenly she's known. A debt unpaid and suddenly she's loose. A red slipper peeking from beneath her dress, and suddenly she's not a person anymore. She's a story, told by men in coffee houses who will never know her name. Tonight a new girl arrives. She's escorted by one of the silent runners, young boys who do errands for all the houses. Trusted with messages, coins, and sometimes bodies, she can't be more than 15. Her name is Elif. She clutches a bag too small for anything but shame. Layla doesn't ask questions. She tells Elif where to sleep, hands her a bowl of soup, and lets the silence wrap around her like a blanket. Later you hear them talking softly behind a curtain. Layla is telling her about the rules, how to spot danger, how to fake a faint, how to say no without saying it. It's not a lesson plan, it's an inheritance. You sit with Huria the next morning, sipping strong tea laced with cloves. Her voice is gravelly, but sharp. She tells you how sometimes girls arrive straight from the provinces, names scraped away by travel and shame. They arrive because someone sold them, or they fled something worse, a drunken father, a promised marriage, a hungry winter. Every girl thinks she's the first, Huria mutters. Every girl thinks she's the last. She hands you an old ledger, brittle with age. It's not a brothel register, it's her own account. A list of debts, payments, names crossed out in ink. She taps a name, Deria, then flips to the back. There's a note. Died of fever. No burial. 3 years, not a single visitor, she says. She was funny, sang like a nightingale, no one remembers her now. You close the book gently. Out in the alley, the city bustles on. A man yells at a donkey. A woman sells dried figs from a cart. Life continues, oblivious to the ledger in Hurrier's lap. And somewhere probably a man is sipping thick black coffee, telling a story about a girl he once knew, one who never really existed, one who vanished as easily as smoke in a cup. You're beginning to see how the boundaries in this world are made of silk thread, easily crossed, easily broken, always entangling someone. Tonight you follow one of the older girls, Rana, on her way to a place that smells more like incense and citrus than sweat and secrets. She walks differently outside the brothel district, straighter, colder, invisible. Her veil is darker, her steps quiet but precise. You trail her at a respectful distance, ducking between spice stalls and prayer call shadows, and eventually find yourself at the back entrance of a mansion perched high above the Golden Horn, its windows glowing soft and gold. This is no house of shame. This is a palace. Or at least a smaller cousin of one. And Rana, she steps inside like she owns it. Later, when she returns, hours later and a little tipsier than usual, she tells you flatly, "Not all girls work in brothels. Some of us get upgraded." This is the first time you hear her talk about them, the women who serve not the common men in taverns, but the pashas, the viziers, and sometimes the sultan himself. It's not an official path. No paperwork, no auditions, but if you're beautiful enough, smart enough, and just lucky enough to attract the right kind of attention, you can go from rickety beds to velvet cushions in a matter of weeks. There's still no freedom, but there's silk, honeyed dates, and a better kind of silence. Rana once served in one of those minor palaces, attached to a bureaucrat whose name doesn't matter, because men like him come and go like fairy smoke. He gave her jewellery, recited poetry he didn't write, and promised to buy her freedom, then married someone else and sent her back with a bruise under her eye and no earrings. Still, she says she misses the pillows. There's a history here, one few people ever tell. Between the sprawling brothels and the famed harem of the Topkapi Palace lies a murky, unspoken category. Women who serve high-ranking men, often exclusively, often in secret, and often under the illusion of protection. They're not concubines, not officially. They're not wives, not legally. They're something else, something temporary, disposable, beautiful. You ask Layla about them. She scoffs. Brothels are safer, she says. A man here hits you, you call his cousin, his brother, the butcher, someone. You work in a palace? Who are you going to tell? The guards, they're the worst of them. She's not wrong. In the palaces, everything is silence and elegance, but no less brutal. A girl who missteps can be sent back to the street, or worse. Rumours float around about drownings, disappearances, punishments passed off as illness. No one confirms them, of course. The upper class is good at sweeping things under silk carpets. Historical fact. While the Sultan's harem is famous, most people forget it housed hundreds of women, many of whom were never even seen by the Sultan. Instead, they were gifted to pashas or sent to provincial governors as tokens of political loyalty. Some ended up with power, others as glorified servants. A lucky few rose high, most didn't. Fringe fact, some high-ranking women, once freed, opened their own establishments, discreet upscale brothels frequented by poets, scholars, and the occasional foreign diplomat. These places were not just for pleasure, but for politics. Secrets traded over sherbet. Alliances sealed between silken sheets. And here's where the scholarly debate gets messy. Were these women passive victims of a patriarchal empire, or savvy navigators who wielded the tools they had? Some argue they manipulated the structures around them to secure safety, even influence. Others insist no amount of charm could offset the imbalance of power. Both may be true, depending on who you ask and who's telling the story. You meet another woman this week. Her name is Dilruba. She wears gold rings on every finger, and when she walks, her veil flutters behind her like a royal banner. She doesn't live in the brothel district. She owns a small house in the Fatty quarter, passed off as a school for young ladies. Everyone in the neighbourhood pretends they don't know what it really is. The imam nods at her in the street. The butcher gives her discounts. The women whisper behind closed shutters. She invites you in, and you're struck by the silence. No yelling, no slamming doors, just polished floors, clean sheets, and girls walking like they belong. It's not kindness. Dilruba isn't a saint, but she runs a tight ship. No beatings, no underage girls. No drunken clients, everything here is by appointment. She sits you down in her private salon, pours sweet tea from a silver pot and says without irony, "I am a businesswoman. I manage risk, I pay the guards, I handle reputations, and I make sure my girls don't leave in coffins." You believe her. She shows you a ledger. Neat columns, names written in careful ink. She even has a coded system for illnesses, days off, pregnancy. It's more organised than most actual Ottoman tax records. You ask her how she got started. She smiles faintly. "I used to be property. Now I own property." There's a portrait on her wall, done in watercolours, slightly faded. A young girl, maybe 12, with sad eyes and a scar along her collarbone. You recognise her. It's her. Before the rings, before the business. She catches you staring and nods. I keep it to remember. If I forget, I'll become what I escaped. You ask if she ever regrets it. Only when I'm foolish enough to hope. She escorts you out before sunset, careful not to draw attention. Even a woman as powerful as her knows the rules don't bend forever. You walk back through the streets as the lamps are lit, tiny stars catching in the oil-slicked puddles along the way. Later that night, you ask Layla what happens when girls like Rana or Dilruba fall in love with their patrons. She doesn't answer right away. Then, they stop eating. You nod. And just like that, the line between brothel and palace, pleasure and prison, becomes blurrier than ever. These women are passed from hand to hand, room to room, title to title. Not always forced, not always willing, and never truly free. But some of them claw power from the margins. They learn the language of silk and subtext. They rise even if only for a while. And as you drift to sleep, the echo of footsteps on marble floors follows you, along with the soft click of rings against a tea glass, and the sound of a girl learning to walk like a lady in a house that only pretends to love her. You head down to the docks just after sunrise, where the air smells like brine and ash, and gulls scream overhead like they've lost something valuable. It's a part of the city that never sleeps, where everything feels a little damp, a little broken, and a little too alive. The Bosphorus glints under a streaky grey sky as boats bump softly against each other, creaking like old bones. This is the first place many women from the empire's far edges first set foot in Istanbul, not through the front gates, but offloaded like crates of almonds and dried apricots. Today you're watching the arrival of a small ship from the Black Sea coast, its hull packed with trade goods and more than a few unfamiliar faces. Among the sacks of onions and barrels of olive oil, you spot 3 girls huddled together, eyes wide, scarves pulled tight around their necks. One looks about 16. One might be older. The third, you hope she's just tall for her age. A man with a braided beard speaks to the harbour official, waving a paper that probably lists them as servants. But the girls aren't carrying anything. They're not looking for someone. They're just waiting. Layla told you about this. They come in waves. Georgians, Circassians, Greeks, Serbs, a border shifts, a war starts, and suddenly there's a market again. She said it like she was talking about cloth or sugar, like it was just supply and demand. You follow discreetly as the girls are led up into the Galata quarter, slipping into the folds of the city like droplets into a well. They don't scream, they don't resist. Whatever fight they had, they left it back at whatever ruined village sent them here. The man leads them into a tall stone house with green shutters. You walk past an hour later and see a young boy hanging up new curtains in the front window. The house is open for business. There's a long, dark history beneath this that isn't written on the plaques in museums. Foreign girls were highly sought after in the Ottoman sex trade. The reasons given were always vague, something about their beauty, their exoticness, their docility. But the truth is simpler. They were easier to control, they lacked the networks, the language, and often the legal protections that Muslim women could claim, even if those protections were mostly theoretical. Historical fact, the 17th and 18th centuries saw frequent complaints from local religious leaders about the increase in foreign temptation corrupting the city's morality. These complaints rarely led to reforms. Instead, they led to more taxes, more quiet tolerance, and occasionally more violence against the girls who were blamed for being too desirable. Fringe fact, some foreign girls, particularly Circassians, became so prized in both prostitution and the imperial harem that families back in the Caucasus began intentionally grooming daughters for these roles, hoping they'd be selected by traders or sold to the palace. That's how normalised it became, trafficking disguised as opportunity. The debate, of course, is about consent. Were these girls victims of enslavement? Were they sold by families? Did some come willingly, believing they'd find a better life in the city than in the mountains or on war-torn plains? Scholars argue endlessly, with little agreement. The answer, like most things in this story, is layered in grief and economics. You meet one of the foreign women that night, Sophia, from a town near Salonika. She sits on the edge of a windowsill, her profile lit by the flicker of a nearby brazier. Her Turkish is halting but elegant. Her real name, she says, is something unpronounceable. So everyone to here just calls her Sophia Hanım, as if that little honorific makes the whole thing less grim. She was promised a job as a domestic servant. She ended up in a bathhouse for men who preferred their women blonde and unsure of themselves. The bathhouse isn't a typical brothel. It's more discreet, more theatrical. Steam, music, laughter. The men pretend it's all innocent. Just a massage, just a song, until it isn't. Sophia doesn't cry. She smiles when she speaks, but even when she describes the first night. She says she learned quickly not to look men in the eyes unless she wanted trouble. She started taking extra salt with her food to keep her strength up. She learned to dance, badly at first, then beautifully. The better she danced, the less they touched her. Now, she says, she only performs for the regulars who tip in gold. They think I don't understand what they say, she tells you, but I do. They talk like I'm not human. Like I'm a song they can turn off. That line sticks with you for days. Layla, hearing this, only sighs. The city has always eaten foreigners first. It's how it learns to chew. She tells you of a girl named Alina. Russian, red hair, a laugh like broken bells. She came in through Crimea, promised a place in the harem. Instead, she ended up in a crumbling house near Topain, working off a debt that magically kept growing every week. She tried to escape once. The guards caught her. After that, she only worked during the day. Nights were too dangerous for someone with a bruised face and a limp. No one knows what happened to her. Some say she drowned. Some say she married a soldier and moved east. But no one really believes that last part. You begin to notice them more now. Foreign girls in every corner of the city. In the bazaars, selling perfume with eyes that never meet yours. In the alleys, walking quickly, veils pulled too tight. In the hammams, singing in languages no one here understands. They are everywhere and nowhere. Part of the city's heartbeat, but never its face. Some manage to rise. A few, like Sophia, find patrons who treat them well, or at least pretend to. They gain small luxuries, soap from France, combs from Damascus, private rooms with real bedding. But they always know it can be taken away with one word, one whim. You ask Sophia if she dreams of leaving. She nods. Every morning before I open my eyes. And then, I forget. I have to. The night air wraps around you like damp velvet. Somewhere a boat bell clangs softly in the harbour. The city sleeps, but its shadows don't. In one house, a girl whispers a prayer in Greek. In another, someone scrubs blood from a floorboard with lemon water. And across the water, a man writes a poem about a woman he met once, forgetting her name before the ink even dries. The foreign girls of the Ottoman Empire drift through this history like smoke. Hard to catch, harder to keep, but impossible to ignore. They arrive with names, with hopes, with songs from mountain villages, and over time those names are replaced by prices, those hopes by debts, and those songs by silence. But if you listen closely, especially near the docks, you'll still hear them. The echo of accents, the rustle of unfamiliar silk, the quiet refusal to disappear completely. You wake to the sound of coughing, deep, ragged, wet. It echoes through the wooden beams of the house like the low warning of something already too late. At first, you think it's a drunk being dragged home, or someone choking on their morning tea. But then you hear the footsteps, hurried, uneven, and the unmistakable clink of a brass bowl being dropped in panic. When you step into the hall, the smell hits you, a mix of sweat, rose water, and something sharp underneath. Metal, maybe, or decay. It's Hurry, one of the older girls, not as old as Layla, but close. Her skin's gone grey around the mouth and her eyes are two dull glass marbles. Layla is kneeling beside her with a damp cloth, muttering under her breath. Not prayers, but instructions. Not too fast, breathe through your nose, again, good girl, again. You learn later it's the fever. Not just any fever, but the kind that spreads through rooms before anyone notices. The kind that comes and goes in waves, and when it comes back, it usually takes someone with it. They don't call it what it really is, syphilis, gonorrhea, sometimes both, but everyone knows. No one says it out loud like it might make the walls flake or the lamps dim. They just call it the rot. or the French illness, sometimes the nobleman's gift, which always gets a bitter laugh. Huri is carried to the back room, and for the rest of the day, nobody touches her bedding. Even Zeynep, the house matron who fears neither gods nor janissaries, refuses to go near it without a scarf tied tight over her mouth. There's no doctor yet, just herbal tinctures, a little opium, and a lot of guessing. Layla says they'll try to summon the court physician, but he doesn't come cheap, and he doesn't always answer when the address leads to a brothel. Disease is the unspoken constant here. Every silk pillow, every porcelain cup, every kiss is touched by the possibility of sickness. The men don't worry, they come and go, shrugging off consequences like they're smudges on a robe. But for the women, it lingers. Infection doesn't just threaten health, it threatens income, safety, the illusion of desirability. A girl with a persistent cough can find herself out of work by the end of the week. And once you can't earn, well, that's when people stop remembering you. Historical fact, Paldis. By the mid-18th century, the Ottoman court was well aware of the rising spread of venereal disease among sex workers and their clientele. Physicians, often trained in both Islamic and European traditions, prescribed treatments ranging from mercury rubs to dietary changes. Mercury. That's right, one poison to cure another. Fringe fact, some women swore by a bizarre regimen, drinking a mix of vinegar, crushed pearls, and pomegranate molasses. Supposedly it kept the heat of the womb balanced and the disease at bay. Whether it worked is debatable, but it's seen enough to avert journals to know it was more than just a passing myth. There's fierce scholarly debate over how medical care was administered in these unofficial houses. Some say brothels had arrangements with city surgeons, who provided quiet visits in exchange for free access or coin. Others argue most women treated themselves, using folk remedies, religious talismans, or whatever a travelling herb seller was peddling that week. The truth, again, is probably somewhere grim in the middle. When the doctor finally arrives, he smells of cardamom and boredom. His robes are too clean, his moustache too carefully combed. He nods at the madam, glances at Huri without touching her hair, and asks a few questions she's too weak to answer. Then he mixes a paste of crushed garlic and honey, smears it on her lips, and tells them to let her rest. Keep her warm, he says. If she starts bleeding from the gums, write her name down, so the soul doesn't get lost. Then he leaves, taking his little tin of coins and a hard biscuit someone wrapped in linen for the road. You sit by Huri's bed that night. She's breathing shallow now. Her skin has gone tight and waxy, like she's slowly turning into paper. A candle flickers beside her, and every so often she mutters something in her sleep. Names, maybe. A song. The word Baba, repeated like a rhythm. You don't ask who she's calling for, there's no one left to answer. Layla brings in warm cloths and a bowl of soup no one expects Huri to drink. She wipes the girl's brow and hums a lullaby. One you've heard before, but only from the rooms when girls thought no one was listening. Sleep, my star, the sea is dark, the moon will wait until you spark. You ask Layla if they've lost many girls this way. Too many, she says. We don't mark the walls anymore. You ask if they ever tell the clients. She gives you a look like you just suggested setting the place on fire. Would you drink from a cup you thought was cracked? She's not being cruel, she's being practical. In the morning, Huri's gone. Not dead yet, but taken to a house farther out. One of the retreats the madams use for girls who can't work anymore. It's not a real hospital, it's a place to lie down and wait. Some girls recover, most fade. They don't bury them in the usual cemeteries. Muslim women who died under the label of sex work were rarely given proper rites. Often they were buried on the fringes, near crossroads or wastelands, somewhere between dishonour and forgetting. Sometimes the girls were Jewish or Christian, and their bodies would be quietly transferred to their respective quarters, wrapped in cheap cloth, lowered without much noise. The law says everyone deserves a proper burial. The city prefers not to look too closely. Later you watch as Sophia, the foreign girl, quietly boils a jar of water mixed with herbs she won't name. It helps, she says. Not cure, but helps. She says an old woman in Salonika taught it to her. You ask what the herbs are. She holds a finger to her lips and smiles. If I tell you, the spirits will leave. Disease doesn't just haunt these rooms, it shapes them. The layout of the house, the windows that open too wide, the incense burners in every corner, the endless boiling of linens, it's all part of the fight. A silent war waged with candles and compresses, and still the men come, still they knock, Still, they hand over coins and stories and sweat and walk away believing nothing follows them. But you stay behind. You see what they don't. You see the basin filled with pink water. You see the scarf stained with blood. You see the quiet way Sophia looks at her own reflection, counting her ribs in the mirror before she gets dressed. You see the cost. And somewhere in the dark you hear the coughing begin again. You've passed by the same mosque a dozen times now. Its minaret looms quiet during the day, a pale finger against the sky, but at night, when the lamps are lit and the air thickens with dusk, it seems to lean in closer, watching, maybe judging. The call to prayer rises, floating over rooftops and echoing through the narrow alleys, weaving past brothels and taverns like a slow, soft warning, and every time it reaches Layla's house, the sound is met with silence. No one stops working, no one drops to their knees, no one even looks up. You ask Layla why one night, as she's wringing out a rag over the sink. Why what, she says. Why you never pray. Why the girls don't. She doesn't answer at first, just wrings the rag tighter. Then, we stopped pretending a long time ago. Religion in the Ottoman Empire is everywhere. It's the spine of law, the language of power, the reason given for punishment and praise. Imams deliver fire from minbars about the dangers of immorality, of women who lure men away from righteousness, of homes where vice runs like water. But what they don't mention, what no one admits, is that some of those imams disappear into the very houses they condemn when the sun goes down. There's a rumour that one of the most respected preachers in Ayup visits a girl named Yasmin every Thursday after evening prayer. Always after he's finished a sermon on chastity, always with his cloak pulled tight around his face. Yasmin doesn't talk about it, but she's the only girl in the house with a full-length mirror and a brass comb set imported from Venice. No one asks questions. That's part of the arrangement. Historical fact. While Islamic law clearly prohibited prostitution, it also included intricate rules for punishment, repentance and forgiveness, often dependent on a woman's marital status, religious affiliation, and whether her actions were considered public scandal or private sin. In practice, though, enforcement was inconsistent, tangled in a web of politics, bribery and community pressure. Fringe fact, some sex workers would memorize verses of the Quran to recite if caught in raids. One well-known madame in Izmir reportedly kept a prayer book in her bodice, not out of faith, but because the guards would sometimes hesitate if they saw the holy text on her person. A shield made of ink and leather, and there's a thick knot of scholarly debate here. Some argue that religious leaders were complicit in the system of sex work, using selective enforcement and hush-hush tolerance to maintain moral control while still indulging. Others insist the clergy was divided, some fiercely opposed, others just exhausted by the empire's refusal to actually clean up what it quietly profited from. You sit with a young girl named Hayeva later that evening. She's stitching a tear in the hem of her robe, her fingers trembling slightly. "I used to fast," she says. "I used to pray 5 times a day. I wore the hijab. I even wanted to memorize the Quran." "What changed, you ask?" She shrugs. "I got hungry." The girls talk about religion the way a soldier talks about armour. Something they used to wear, something they used to trust until it stopped working. Some still keep a prayer bead or a verse scribbled on a piece of cloth tucked inside their mattress. Not for forgiveness, not for God, for memory, for some fragile link to who they were before this life rewrote them. One girl, Daria, paints her nails with crushed rose petals every Friday before the noon prayer. She says it's a joke, you're not so sure. It's not that these women are faithless. Many of them believe, just not in salvation, not anymore, not for themselves. They've heard too many men claim God's will after leaving bruises, too many sermons that scolded them for surviving, too many nights where the only thing holy was the silence that followed a slammed door. Still, the mosques glow beautifully at night. Their domes catch the moonlight like polished bowls of silver, and the chants echo through the city like a balm for those still luckier enough to belong. You find yourself watching a group of men exit a small mosque near the bazaar. Their faces are serene, their sandals slap softly against the stone. One of them is a merchant you saw in the brothel 2 nights ago. He tipped poorly and asked Layla if she had anything younger. You wonder if he prays for the same things he buys. Later, you sit outside with Layla and Hurriye. The stars are sharp tonight, like someone polished the sky. A soft breeze carries the distant echo of prayer. You ask if they ever feel conflicted, selling something the faith calls forbidden. Huria spits into the dirt. They think it's the sex God hates, she says, but maybe it's the lies. Layla adds, God doesn't come here, or maybe he does, but he keeps his mouth shut. You ask if they ever go to the mosque. Layla snorts. To do what? Ask for mercy from men who'd stone at us if they weren't too busy watching? Huria says she went once, years ago. A girl she knew had died. The imam refused to say the funeral prayer, called her a shameless thing, so Huria said it herself, loudly, in the courtyard, with the girl's mother sobbing behind her and 36 men pretending not to listen. After that, she never went back. There's a graveyard outside the city walls, unofficial and unmarked. The girls call it the Garden of the Unnamed. It's where the bodies go and no one wants to admit they belong to someone. You ask if it's true they bury sex workers there. Only the lucky ones, Layla says. The others, they disappear. Into rivers, into alleyways, into the city's memory hole. You return to your room and try to write everything down, but the words come slow. There's too much smoke between the truth and the telling. You look out the window at a mosque across the hill. Its dome glows like a soft lantern against the dark. Beautiful, untouched, as if it floats above the city rather than stands within it. You wonder what it would be like to kneel on clean rugs and believe that someone is listening. But here in this house, the prayers sound different. They come in the form of laughter over shared bread, of whispered songs before sleep, of a hand held gently during fever. They are small, unspoken and unpaid for, and maybe, in a world that never gives these women absolution, that is the holiest thing of all. There's a man waiting at the door when you return from the market. Not waiting for you, he barely glances your way, but for someone inside. He stands with the forced casualness of a man who doesn't want to be seen waiting. One hand tucked into his sash, the other flicking nervously at the small silver ring on his thumb. His robe is too clean, too pressed, and the scent rolling off him is all rosewater and expensive anxiety. You know his type before he even speaks, official face, unofficial business. Layla opens the door not with warmth but with calculation. She's already smiling, but not with her eyes. Is the kind of smile you wear for coin. The man steps in and glances around like someone stepping into a place his mother told him never to go. When he passes you, he gives the faintest nod, as if that makes it formal, as if recognition will make it less pathetic. Later, you find out his name is Yusuf, and he's not here as a client, at least not tonight. He's what Layla calls a walker, a middleman, a broker, technically a coffee merchant on Pia. In reality, he arranges women, moves them between houses, negotiates prices, keeps certain names off certain lists. He deals in favours, secrets, and girls who don't know how many times they've been sold. Layla calls him a dog in silk. He calls himself a facilitator. You sit with him that evening, surprisingly invited into the game. He's not ashamed of what he does, just bored of pretending it's something else. Over a plate of pistachios and dried dates, he lays out the unofficial hierarchy. There are brothels for sailors, for janissaries, for merchants, for the French, he says, grinning. Then there are the specialty houses, music, poetry, girls with certain talents. And then there are the private apartments, the ones that don't exist. You raise an eyebrow. He continues. Those are for officials, men with names, men who think too much shame is bad for their blood pressure. He's not exaggerating. There's a whole layer of society that uses Yusuf's kind of service. People too powerful to be seen at public brothels, too cowardly to give their real names. They want guarantees, clean girls, silence, discretion delivered with tea and fruit. Yusuf ensures that. He tells you about one client, a vizier who required girls to dress like schoolteachers and read him poetry while he wept. Another wanted only women who could sing in Persian. Another collected virgins like spices, never touching them, only observing as if they were porcelain. Yusuf keeps it all in his head. No ledgers, no paper trail, too dangerous. He pays the guards and he bribes the judges. He owns nobody, but everyone owes him. Historical fact, Ottoman bureaucrats, especially those stationed in Istanbul, were known to frequent private houses that offered companionship services discreetly. While official records avoided the subject entirely, private correspondences and travelogues make it clear. The higher the rank, the more creative the vice. Fringe fact, some of the empire's most discreet couriers were women. Pseudo-sex workers recruited by men like Yusuf to carry letters, secrets, even coded information between districts. Their mobility, often underestimated, made them the perfect agents. No one suspects the girl in the red sash to be a spy. There's a long-standing debate among historians about how organised the Ottoman sex trade really was. Was it a loose network of independent women and small houses? Or was it, as some suspect, a semi-official system quietly enabled by the state? Men like Yusuf are the missing link in that question. Never named, but always there, greasing the wheels. Back in the house, the girls don't like him. He's useful, but not liked. Useful because he can find work, disliked because he can just as easily take it away. You ask Layla why she lets him in at all. Because he pays on time, she says, and because sometimes we need someone to know where the bodies are buried. He returns the next night with a girl. New, young, pale. Her eyes are the colour of ash after rain. She doesn't speak. She doesn't blink much either. Just stands there like a misplaced object, her shoes too tight, her dress too clean. Yusuf doesn't introduce her, just gives Layla a slip of paper and walks out whistling. The paper lists a name, a price and a warning. No bruises. Owner checks monthly. Owner. Not father, not guardian, not husband. Owner. The girl is led to a room and handed a comb. That's it. Welcome to the city. Later that night, Layla tells you about a time Yusuf tried to sell her too. Years ago, when she was just starting out, he offered her to a silk merchant with a preference for quiet girls. He thought I'd make a good mute, she says, laughing darkly. I laughed in his face. He stopped trying after that. You ask why she still deals with him. Because even dogs know how to open certain doors, she says. And in this business, knowing which door to knock on can mean the difference between warm soup and cold river water. There's something terrifying about Yusuf's kind of power. It's soft, invisible, and completely untraceable. He'll never appear in the history books. No monument will bear his name. But he's the reason some girls survive, and the reason others vanish. You see him again days later, leading two women into a carriage with shuttered windows. They are dressed as merchants' wives. Rings, veils, everything in its place go. No one looks twice. The carriage rolls away without a sound, and Yusuf lights a clove cigarette, staring at the Bosphorus like he owns it. You wonder if he sleeps well at night. Then you realise it probably doesn't matter. The men like Yusuf aren't here for comfort or meaning. They're here to survive, just like the women, just like the houses they keep afloat, just like the empire itself, built not on justice or faith, but on transactions, favours, and the careful shuffling of people from one dark hallway to another. If the empire runs on whispers, then the real governors of this underworld are not men in turbans or clerics with scrolls. They're the madams, older women with quiet power, chipped nails, and the uncanny ability to read a face before the lips even move. They don't need titles. They don't need swords. They rule by reputation and silence. You spend a day with three of them, and by sunset you feel like you've sat in a room full of dragons, aging, regal, dangerous. The first is Hurrier, of course. You've met her before. Her eyes are tired but knife-sharp, and she runs her house like a scribe runs an archive. Everything in its place, nothing wasted, and every name remembered. She tells you over tea that the real currency in this business isn't gold. It's favour, she says. You keep someone's secret, and they owe you, long after the coins are gone. She pulls out a box from under the floorboards. Inside are little slips of paper, some sealed with wax, some scribbled in hasty ink. Letters, notes, confessions. All written by men who now wear sashes of office or sit in judges' chairs. Some are love letters, some are threats, some are just payments. She doesn't show you what's inside, just smiles. One day, if they forget who I am, she says, I'll remember for them. Then there's Nazan, across the Golden Horn. She runs a rougher place, more noise, more drinking, and a lower-class clientele. Her house smells like fish and sweat, but it's always full. She wears a blue shawl and carries a walking stick, not because she needs it, but because she likes to hit people with it. When you ask how she got into this work, she cackles and says, My husband died, left me with debts and 3 girls to feed. So I turned the house into a brothel, sold his carpets and never looked back. Nazan believes in rules. Her girls don't work more than 6 nights a week. They get 2 meals a day, and if any man raises a hand, he's banned for life. She once chased a janissary out into the street barefoot because he tried to short her girls' pay. This stick has kissed more noble heads than most royal rings, she boasts. Then she grows quiet. Tells you about a girl named Ekin. who worked for her for 7 years, disappeared one night after taking a new client. Nazan went to the guards, bribed a magistrate, even threatened a priest. Nothing. Ekin was gone. The only trace for a pair of earrings left behind in her pillow. I still keep them, she says, just to remember someone should have looked harder. The third madam you meet is called Shefar, which means healing. Ironically, she runs a place where many come to be broken. Her house is quieter than the others, more refined. The kind of place politicians visit under fake names. Her girls play instruments. One recites Rumi poetry, another makes miniature paintings in her spare time. Shefar herself is soft-spoken, but with the posture of someone who's been interrupted too many times in her life and no longer tolerates it. She says very little, offers you almond milk with rose water, then sits across from you and waits for your questions like she's already heard them all before. You ask her what makes a good madam. Discretion, she says, and a long memory. You ask if she ever worked as a girl. Yes. You wait. She doesn't elaborate. Instead, she shows you a ledger. Not names, not clients, debts. Birthdays, illnesses, notes like Gulbahar's father died, check if she needs to go home, or Elif limping again, get balm from the Greek. It's like reading the private thoughts of a woman who never stopped caring, even if the world stopped deserving it. Historical fact, many brothels in the Ottoman Empire were managed by women, particularly former sex workers who aged out of the trade. They had no legal recognition, but wielded significant informal authority within their communities. Some even held influence over local politics through their connections with clients in government. Fringe fact. In the 19th century, a French visitor to Istanbul noted that the madams could make or unmake a man's reputation with a whisper. One story tells of a foreign ambassador who lost his post because a madam leaked a single line from his pillow talk to the wrong ears. True or not, the rumour travelled faster than truth ever could. There's debate among scholars about how much power these women really had. Some argue that they were just slightly more privileged prisoners in a system that still commodified women. Others see them as tacticians, survivors who turned exploitation into structure, who provided shelter and stability where no one else would. You see the truth in all three madams. They are not saints. They charge money. They keep girls working, but they also feed them, protect them, teach them how to read a man's body language like scripture. They know the guards, the doctors, the gossips. They keep ledgers and secrets, and sometimes even knives under the mattress. Back at Layla's, the girls speak of these women with a mix of fear and reverence. Without Nazan, I'd be dead, one says. Shifa saved my sister, another adds, quietly. They call them the gatekeepers. Because once you're under their roof, you either survive or you vanish. You sit outside with Layla, and she tells you she never wanted to be a madam. Too much paperwork, she jokes, but then she gets serious. Too many ghosts, she adds. Every girl you lose sits on your shoulders. You forget their names, but not their faces. You ask if she thinks she'll end up like them. I already am, she says. I just haven't chosen my cane yet. In the quiet, you hear the distant clang of a market closing, the creak of a cart, the soft splash of water in the gutter. Life continues. Indifferent and unstoppable, and somewhere behind thick curtains and candlelit rooms, the madams hold their tiny kingdoms together, not with power, but with memory, with iron rules and softer hands, with stubborn love for the girls who work under their roofs, even if they'll never say the word out loud. You fall asleep that night thinking of ledgers, walking sticks, and the names that never make it past the front gate. But someone remembers, always. You've been in the city long enough now to know that nothing really makes sense unless you follow the coin. Not the sermons, not the laws, not the women's fates or the men's vanishing acts. The smell of incense, the rustle of silks, the poetry scratched onto walls, it all hides the same simple equation. What does it cost to survive? And who pays? Today, you follow the math. It starts in the front room, just after breakfast. The girls are gathered around a chipped copper bowl, counting out coins. Not gossiping, not laughing, just quiet and focused, like it's sacred. Huria keeps a wooden abacus nearby, even though she rarely uses it. She doesn't need to. The numbers are etched into her brain like battle scars. You watch as coins are divided, a cut for the house, a cut for the runner who fetched the client, a cut for the guard at the gate, and finally what's left for the girl. Sometimes it's a single silver Sometimes it's less. If the client tipped well, maybe a bonus. If not, then she gets just enough to buy bread and maybe a small jar of rose oil to mask the fact that she hasn't slept in days. Layla notices your face. It's not charity, she says. It's arithmetic. You ask what the average girl earns in a week. Enough to stay alive, not enough to leave. She explains the scale of things. Younger girls, new to the house, tend to earn more. Demand is high. Clients are curious. After that, things dip, unless a girl learns a trick, a skill, a look that turns heads. Some lean into the exotic, some become experts in flattery, others cultivate sadness like it's perfume. If you're lucky and careful and no one beats you, you might save a few gold coins over the course of a year, maybe even afford your own room. But most don't. Most spend it as fast as it comes, on food, clothes, medicine, bribes. Some send money home, though not as often as they claim. And others gamble it all on the hope of a patron. Ah yes, the patron fantasy. The well-dressed man who returns week after week, who asks your name, who brings sweets from the provinces and promises to take you away from all this. Every girl has one at some point. A pasha, a merchant, a minor poet with delusions of nobility. Some even follow through for a while. Then one day they stop coming, and no one knows why. There's a girl named Melis who still lights a candle for her patron every Thursday evening. He hasn't returned in 4 months. She says he's away on business. Everyone else assumes he's either dead or married. Same result either way. Historical fact. In the Ottoman period, it was common for wealthier men to take on a courtesan or sex worker as a long-term companion, funding her room, her clothes, her safety, in exchange for exclusivity. These arrangements were unofficial and fragile, often ending without warning or compensation. Fringe fact. There were rare cases where such patrons actually freed their companions and married them, particularly among non-Muslim communities, where social mobility was more flexible. One Jewish merchant in Salonika famously married a former prostitute, sparking weeks of scandal that only faded when she donated enough to the local synagogue to shut everyone up. There's debate among historians about whether these patronages were exploitative or empowering. Some see them as a form of pseudo-marriage, offering protection in a world with few other options. Others call it what it was, a long con wrapped in flattery and perfumed promises. Most girls knew better than to believe it lasted. Back in the house, you're watching Elif. New, quiet, and still learning the rules. She's sitting on the floor trying to stretch a single coin into 3 purchases. She asks Sophia how much oil she needs to wash her hair. Sophia shrugs. Enough to make it smell better than the street, she says. That's the only goal. You realise then just how transactional this life is. Every gesture is currency. A smile, a glance, a delay before undressing. It all has weight. The girls aren't just selling their bodies. They're selling time, personality, mood. Some keep diaries of what clients liked. One man wants conversation, one wants silence, one wants to be insulted. The more you remember, the more likely he'll return. Layla pulls out an old ledger from under the floorboards. Her personal one. Not just coins, but stories. Notes. This man cried after, she reads aloud, gave extra. Another entry. Complained about the price of figs, didn't tip. She laughs. It's half joke, half survival manual. You ask if she's ever tried to leave. Her smile is slow. Once, I saved enough to rent a stall, sell cloth, honest work. What happened? No one wanted to buy from me. They knew my face. She shrugs. So I came back. At least here I know the rules. Later, Hurrier gives you a lesson in prices. Everything depends on timing, she says. Ramadan, lower business. Winter, more clients, but they tip less. When a war breaks out, always more money. Men crave comfort when they're scared. She's not wrong. One of the girls tells you she earned double after the plague scare 2 years ago. Everyone thought we'd all die, she says, so they spent like it didn't matter. It's dark, but it's logical. You ask about taxes. Do they pay the state? Only when the state remembers we exist, Hurrier says. Most of the time they just want bribes. Some houses register as entertainment venues or private lodgings. It's all about wording. The empire doesn't officially condone prostitution, but it knows how to look the other way. especially when the coin keeps flowing. Some guards collect inspection fees. Some imams receive charitable donations to remain silent. You realise suddenly that prostitution in the Ottoman Empire isn't a shadow economy. It's just the part everyone pretends isn't there. The girls know it, the madams know it, the men know where. Everyone is complicit in small and large ways. And as you sit by the window listening to the clink of coins downstairs, you understand something else. This world doesn't run on lust or love. It runs on math. Every look has a price. Every silence has weight. Every girl has a breaking point, written in silver and signed in blood, and somehow every night they show up. Hairbrushed. Perfume dabbed, smile rehearsed. The cost never goes down, but they keep paying it anyway. Because what's the alternative? Starvation, shame, disappearance? Or worse, honest work in a world that never forgets what you used to be. You've heard the rumours before, half-laughed whispers behind closed doors, tales told after too much wine or too little caution. But tonight you hear it from Layla herself. She's sitting on the roof, legs crossed. A shawl wrapped around her shoulders even though the night air is warm. She's watching the stars, and for once she looks like she belongs somewhere else, somewhere far away from the peeling walls and smoky laughter below. Not all of us are here just for the money, she says, voice low. Some of us were watching. You wait. She glances over at you, the corner of her mouth twitching. You think I haven't heard secrets? People talk. Men talk the most when they're naked and pretending not to be afraid. That's when she tells you about the night she was approached by a man in a velvet coat too polished to be a client. He didn't want her company. He wanted information. About a merchant who came every Tuesday, a French trader who asked too many questions, a soldier who cried in his sleep and mumbled names that weren't his wife's. Layla didn't answer him, not at first, but the man returned, and eventually she did. It wasn't a formal arrangement, no spying, no secret codes, just careful whispers passed in exchange for coins that came without hands. Sometimes she told the truth, sometimes she lied. Sometimes she kept the coin and said nothing at all. But from that point on, she started listening differently. Not for jokes or gossip, but for patterns. You begin to realise that this world, already layered in shadows, has its own intelligence network. No scrolls, no messengers, just women who hear everything because no one ever expects them to be listening. Historical fact, during the height of Ottoman diplomatic activity in the 17th and 18th centuries, the empire's intelligence gathering became more subtle. While official spies were recruited through military and merchant networks, there is evidence that courtesans and sex workers were occasionally used, especially those who served high-ranking foreign guests. They were trusted to glean information not through force or theft, but through conversation. Fringe fact, a Venetian ambassador once reported that his interpreter warned him never to speak freely around the girls, even those he believed to be illiterate. He claimed they could remember whole conversations, even in languages they weren't supposed to know. Some were trained to repeat them word for word to a handler the next day. There's heated scholarly debate about how formal these operations ever were. Some historians argue it was more a matter of convenience, opportunistic whispers collected by guards or intermediaries rather than a coordinated effort. Others insist that certain brothels were unofficial extensions of the state's listening posts, and a few admit grudgingly that we'll never really know, because no one ever wrote it down. Back in the house, the other girls laugh when you bring it up. "Oh, so now we're spy," Fatma says. "Next you'll tell us we're saving the empire." Sophia leans in, voice quiet. "There's truth in it," she says. "A man tells you more when he thinks you'll forget it by morning." She says a Greek naval officer used to visit her weekly. Always drunk, always weeping. Told her about troop movements, stolen supplies, even names of traitors he suspected. He thought she was just a body in the dark, but she remembered everything. Even now, years later, she can recite the list of names. She never told anyone, not because she was loyal to him, but because no one ever asked. You start to pay more attention after that. The rooms aren't just places of flesh, they are confessionals. Men talk about business deals, betrayals, forbidden letters, and secret fears. Some speak about uprisings in distant provinces. Others mention border changes, ships arriving early, or shipments delayed by mysterious problems. They speak in low voices, in fragments. But the girls stitch those fragments together like quilts. Layla teaches you how to do it. Listen for the pauses, she says. Not what they say, what they don't say. She shows you a ledger, not the usual kind. This one's hidden in a sewing box, scribbled in codes and nicknames. apple merchant cried again. The falcon drinks before sunset. It looks like nonsense, but when she explains it, a picture forms, a chain of trade corruption, a lover's betrayal. A bribe that changed hands just before a tax raid. None of it confirmed, all of it felt. You ask if she ever told the guards, and she laughs. The guards, they're worse than the men. She's given information only twice, once to a rival madam, once to a visiting diplomat steward. Both times she made sure the person she named deserved it. Both times someone vanished shortly after. Sometimes justice just needs a better listener, she says, but it's not all high politics. Most of the secrets are petty, ordinary, human. A baker who fakes his flour weights, a priest who drinks too much before Friday prayers, a wife who pays a girl to pretend she's someone else just to test her husband's fidelity. And the girls, they trade these secrets like cards, a form of power, a way to stay alive. Tonight a janissary comes in, drunk and bragging, says he heard rumours of unrest near the Syrian border, says he's being moved out next week, but no one's supposed to know. Fatma listens, smiling. Later she tells Huriye, who files it away with the same nonchalance as she counts her coins. It's not war, she says. Not yet. You ask why they bother, why they remember, why they care. Layla answers for everyone, because knowledge is the only thing they can't take off you. The men may forget, but the women? They remember who's lying, who's scared, who's planning something. They remember who has a mistress, who beat a girl last winter, who offered gold to silence a scream. They don't write it down, they just carry it. In smiles, in nods, in silence, and when it matters, they use it. That night you dream of paper birds flying between rooms, carrying secrets written in invisible ink. And the women who sent them, laughing softly, drinking tea, sharpening memory into something sharper than any blade. You can smell him before you see him. Orange blossoms and powdered, pipe smoke and soap, heavy scents that cling to his cloak and leak into the walls like gossip. The man in question is sitting on a velvet cushion in the parlour, legs crossed like he's posing for a painting, one hand delicately holding a porcelain cup of wine that he won't drink until someone important is watching. His name is Etienne, and he's French, though you suspect that's only true when it suits him. He speaks Turkish with a lazy drawl, adds Arabic phrases when it sounds romantic, and switches to Italian when he wants to insult someone without consequence. One of his boots is trimmed in gold. He leans back when he talks, and forwards when he wants to be understood. Every part of him radiates a practiced decadence, like a man who's studied how to be Eastern, just enough to seem charmingly lost in translation. He's a diplomat, technically, a liaison for some minor French mission to the port, though no one's entirely sure what he actually does besides drink, flirt, and pay too much for imported perfume. He arrives at Layla's house once a week, always with a new girl on his arm or a bottle of wine in his coat. Tonight, he's come alone. I needed real company, he says in French, as if that excuses him from something. The girls mostly ignore him, except Sophia, who humours his accent and earns double tips because of it. She speaks to him in French, switches to Greek when she's annoyed, and uses her prettiest Turkish when she wants him to leave. But Etienne isn't just here for pleasure. He brings stories, news, rumours from the embassies. Who's marrying whom? What the Dutch envoy said at dinner. Which Russian officer insulted a janissary and got slapped for it. He spills all of it like wine, dripping little truths onto silk and then watching to see who blots it up first. You sit near him tonight, letting his words unfurl. The East, he says dramatically, is a place of hidden doors and open bisous. He thinks that's profound. It isn't. But it's true. Foreign men have always come to Istanbul chasing the dream of the exotic. They write letters home about veiled women and endless baths, about harems they've never seen and luxuries they can't pronounce. The Ottoman Empire to them is a scented mirage. And women like Layla, they are the oasis, the mirage, and the mapmaker all at once. Historical fact, during the 18th century, Istanbul was a favourite post for European diplomats. The city's allure wasn't just political, it was sensual. Many foreign consuls and ambassadors openly frequented brothels, often protected by their immunity, often contributing to the spread of gossip across court lines. Fringe fact, one British ambassador reportedly kept a pleasure journal noting the names and talents of various sex workers in Galata. He later used it as a reference when deciding which houses deserved protection. It was found among his personal papers after his death. stained with wine and folded into a volume of poetry. There's a great scholarly argument about how this sexual tourism affected the Ottoman world. Some argue it poisoned local culture, introducing new vices and deeper corruption. Others claim the empire always had its own version of decadence, and the Europeans just dressed it in different fabrics. Either way, the girls at Layla's house knew how to use it. Because foreign clients paid more, they asked fewer questions, and they left faster. Sophia tells you she once met a Prussian officer who fell in love with her after 2 visits. He promised to take her to Berlin, gave her a necklace, and vanished a week later. The necklace turned out to be fake. She still keeps it. Not out of sentiment, but as a warning. Layla once had a Dutch trader who liked to paint. Said he wanted to capture the essence of the East. He made her sit half naked on a stool for 3 hours while he sketched her in charcoal. The painting, she says, looked nothing like her. She was too soft in the face, too docile in the eyes. She never saw the man again. But months later, one of the younger girls saw the portrait in a merchant's villa, framed, titled Veil of the Bosphorus. Foreign men love to name things they don't understand. Tonight, Etienne asks if he can borrow Sophia for a stroll along the water. He promises to keep her safe. Huria declines, smiling with all her teeth. "You can look at the water from the balcony," she says sweetly. He sulks a little, but doesn't argue. He knows the limits here. Even diplomats can be replaced. Later you sit with Layla and ask what she thinks of men like him. "They are like perfume," she says. "Expensive, flattering, and gone with one wash." But she also admits they're useful. When the French are involved, people pay attention. And sometimes, when you need a magistrate to forget a name or a tax official to look away, it helps to have a friend with a letter of introduction and a pocket full of foreign arrogance. You ask if the girls ever dream of marrying one. Layla looks at you like you have just confessed to licking a chamber pot. "They leave," she says flatly. "They always leave." Still, some girls try. There's always one, fluent in French, extra modest, willing to play the innocent. They practice writing their names in Roman script. Imagine a house in Paris, a life without curtains over every choice. It rarely ends well. The girl disappears, the letters stop, a few coins come once, then never again. The house quietly closes her door and moves on. You watch Etienne stumble into the night, singing softly to himself. He leaves behind a generous tip and a faint trail of cloves. Sophia rolls her eyes but pockets the coins. "He's not the worst," she says. "At least he doesn't cry." Back in your room, you open a window and let the sea breeze carry in the laughter and music from some nearby tavern. The city glitters with secrets and pretense. You think about the strange blend of seduction and power, of language and performance. How these women survive by letting others believe they're the fantasy. But they aren't the dream. They're the ones who wake up, and they always remember who fell asleep in their arms talking too much. The news spreads before dawn, whispered like a ghost story from room to room. There's a new sultan, and he's furious. At first, you think it's just gossip. Another half-truth, passed along by the someone who overheard a drunk janissary muttering outside a tavern. But then the tone in the streets shifts. The coffee houses go quieter. The guards at the corners straighten their backs. Even the merchants in the bazaar start hiding the more questionable merchandise behind veils and euphemisms. Something is changing. By midday, it's official. The old sultan, soft-spoken, aging, rumoured to prefer gardens over government, is dead. And his replacement? Young, ambitious, famously pious. The sermons have already begun. We shall return to moral order, they say. The city shall be cleansed. Layla says the same thing everyone else does when an announcement like that rolls through the alleys. He'll outlaw pleasure and then sneak in through the back door like the rest of them. But she's still nervous. They all are. You feel it in the way the girls move that night. Quieter, eyes darting to windows. The usual singing is absent. No music, no laughter. Even Huria keeps her wine out of sight. For a place built on indulgence, there's suddenly a hunger for invisibility. Then just after nightfall, the first house is raided. Not this one, but one 2 streets over, run by an Armenian widow named Anahid. The guards come fast and loud, no warning. No chance to hide the girls or the ledgers. Windows shattered, lamps knocked over. Anahid dragged into the street barefoot, her grey hair falling out of its braid. She screams but not for help. She screams names of clients, officials, men in turbans who owe her money. That's when the whispers turn to real fear. Within 2 days, 3 more houses are shuttered. Girls arrested, some vanish, some are seen weeping outside the magistrate's chambers, trying to explain that they aren't criminals. They're workers. But no one wants to hear it now. The city is gripped by a new wave of moral panic. Historical fact: several Ottoman sultans, particularly during periods of social unrest or transition, enacted clean-up campaigns against what they saw as moral corruption. These often included temporary but brutal crackdowns on prostitution, alcohol, gambling, and music. The raids were rarely permanent, but they were devastating while they lasted. Fringe fact: in one such campaign during the early 19th century, a decree demanded that all known brothels be burned to the ground. The fire spread to nearby shops and homes. Instead of apology, the officials called it divine punishment. And the debate: was it about morality or politics? Some scholars argue these crackdowns were never truly about sin, but about control. A new ruler needed to show power, to please the conservative factions, to distract the population from unrest or bad harvests. Others believe at least some of the rulers were genuine in their religious fervour, believing they were purifying the empire. Either way, the women paid the price. Back at Layla's, they start preparing for the worst. The curtains are replaced with thicker fabric, extra bolts are added to the doors. The younger girls are taught a new story: we're seamstresses, we do embroidery, we just rent the rooms. You sit in on a lesson. Sophia is coaching Elif on how to speak if questioned. Smile. Say your uncle pays for the room. Don't say house, say lodging. Never admit you've met any men. Elif is terrified. She trembles even as she practices the lines. What if they know? She asks. They always know, Sophia replies. The trick is making them doubt it. Layla tells you about the last time a purge happened years ago. She was younger then, working in a different house. The guards came in the middle of the night. She hid in a laundry basket. When she came out, the front room was destroyed. The madam beaten. 2 of the girls arrested. 1 never returned. It was over in a week, she says. Then the same guards came back a month later, asking for a discount. That's the part no one writes down. The hypocrisy. The same men who enforce the bans are often the first to break them. They wield morality like a sword in public and tuck it under their robes in private. You ask Kyrie if she's afraid. She pours you a drink and says, "Fear is expensive. I can't afford it this week." But she makes changes. She moves the ledgers. She burns old notes. She tells half the girls not to work. "Only the regulars," she says. "The ones we trust." Even then, there's tension in every knock at the door. Every voice in the street, the sound of boots on cobblestone makes everyone freeze. The city feels like a coiled wire, and yet the clients still come, slipping in quietly, heads down, sashes tied tight. They come for the comfort, for the illusion that the world hasn't shifted. One man even apologizes as he enters, whispering, "I know it's risky, I just needed somewhere." He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The girls do their work with more care now, more silence. The laughter is gone. Every movement is rehearsed. Every encounter feels like a coin flipped in the dark. Maybe nothing, maybe disaster. You realize just how precarious everything is. One man's decision, one decree read aloud by a trembling crier, and the entire economy of shadow, desire, and survival is upended. You sit with Layla that night, both of you listening for footsteps. You think it'll pass? You ask. She nods. It always does, but something breaks each time. What broke last time? She doesn't answer, just stares at the candle, watching it burn lower and lower until the wick curls into nothing. You go to sleep fully dressed, boots by the door, just in case, and you dream not of brothels or punishments, but of scents, heavy, suffocating scenes, settling over a city that's forgotten how to name the people it punishes most. You're walking through the spice bazaar when it happens. A woman steps out from a tea shop in a silk cloak dyed the colour of crushed pomegranates, and suddenly everyone notices. Not because she's beautiful, though she is, but because of the way she walks. Slow, unbothered, intentional. A few men nearby pause mid-sentence. A boy selling licorice twists stares so long he nearly drops his tray. And what gives her away isn't the perfume or the coal or even the glint of silver at her ear. It's the sash. Red, thin, tied off centre at her waist. You wouldn't have known its meaning before, but now it's unmistakable. That silk ribbon might as well be a business card. In this part of Istanbul, it says everything without saying a word. You follow her for a while, quietly, respectfully, as she winds her way through the crowds, accepting glances like tribute and sidestepping insults like puddles. She ducks into an herb stall, then into a leather shop, and eventually disappears down a narrow side street where the real economy of the city hums in low tones and soft shadows. Back at Layla's, you ask her about the red sash. Old code, she says, not looking up from her stitching, back when they didn't need to hide her so well. Turns out that clothing in the Ottoman Empire spoke in dialects. A coloured sash, a beaded slipper, the way a scarf was folded or not. These were signals, markers, and for the women in this trade, they were both invitation and warning. Red means for hire, Huria adds, but there are other signals too. Gold thread in the hem, that's a woman under protection. Slippers with blue embroidery, that means she won't go cheap. A veil too sheer, well, that's its own conversation. Historical fact. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, certain Ottoman cities developed informal dress codes that helped differentiate between respectable women and those working in sex-related trades. These codes were never officially acknowledged, but they were widely understood. In some districts of Istanbul, even the colour of a woman's headscarf could signal her profession. Fringe fact? There was an actual law passed in the late 1600s that attempted to regulate what colours and fabrics prostitutes could wear. Supposedly, they were banned from wearing silk and gold-threaded garments, but enforcement was spotty and deeply corrupt. Many women simply paid guards to forget the law existed. Others wore cheap knockoffs and passed them off as contraband fashion. There's debate over how much autonomy these fashion choices actually gave the women. Some argue the signals helped protect them, offering a layer of clarity and community recognition. Others say the codes only deepened their marginalisation, reducing identity to costume and meaning to clothing. Sophia says it's all a game. We dress the way they expect, so they won't ask what they don't want to know. And she's right. The veil is one example. Most of the girls wear one outside the house, but not to hide themselves. It's theatre, a nod to propriety, quickly undone once the door closes. But sometimes, Layla says, you forget which version of you you're pretending to be. You meet a woman named Zara later that week. She's older, sharp-witted, with a laugh like gravel and honey. She used to run a fashion stall near the docks, selling lace and ribbon, and she still keeps a book of fashion codes, drawings of how women from every quarter wore their clothes, annotated in the margins with meanings. She points to a sketch of a woman in a yellow scarf with a silver clasp. That's Kadıköy, she says, modest but flirty. Another shows a woman with an open coat and white slippers. Galata girl, Russian maybe, new in town. Zara says she used to make extra money sewing secret pockets into women's skirts to hide coins, letters, small vials of opium. Whatever was needed. Clothes aren't just clothes, she tells you. They're currency. You notice it more now, everywhere. The way one girl in Layla's house always wears green on Thursdays, her lucky colour. The way another leaves her left shoulder bare when meeting a new client, because she read somewhere that it makes her seem inviting but dangerous. The girls have whole philosophies built on wardrobe. Even Layla has rules. Never wear red unless you mean it. Never wear all white unless you're asking for trouble. Never go barefoot in front of a client. He'll think you're his servant or his dream. Neither is good. It's not just clothing either. Jewellery speaks its own language. One girl wears bells on her ankles when she's tired of being touched. Men hesitate at the sound. Another wears a ring on her index finger, only when she's bleeding, as a silent cue to the madam not to send her up that night. These codes live in the seams and folds of their lives, shared and reshaped with each generation. But of course it can all backfire. There's a story going around about a girl in Üsküdar who wore a red sash by mistake. Fashion, not signal. A tailor's apprentice from the provinces, new to the city. Within a day she was approached by 3 men. One offered money, one offered work. The third followed her home. She screamed. No one listened. The sash disappeared after that. So did the girl. Layla hears the story and says nothing for a long time. Then she pulls a red ribbon from a box and tosses it into the fire. Better to be unknown than misread, she says. And you feel the weight of it. The way identity becomes armour. The way every fabric is woven not just with threads, but warnings. At night, you walk the streets with new eyes. Every woman you pass is speaking in symbols. You just never learnt the language before. The brothels may be hidden, the laws may lie, but the body, The body remembers, and the clothes it wears are both decoration and defence, and for the women of Layla's world, fashion is not luxury. It is signal, shield, and sometimes sword. By the time you reach the coast, everything feels warmer. Wetter, too. Air so thick with salt and humidity that your clothes cling to you like regret. You've left behind the domes and hills of Istanbul for the sprawling, sun-bleached port cities at the edge of the empire. First Izmir, then Alexandria. Here, the empire's pulse beats faster and stranger. There's no soft pretense of piety here. No muezzins trying to out-sing each other over the rooftops. Just the smell of fish, heat-soaked wood, wine spilled in the sand, and the sea always watching. In Izmir, you meet a woman named Mariam who runs a house tucked between two spice warehouses. It looks like an apothecary from the front. Jars of dried lavender, bundles of cinnamon, sticks tied with string, a table stacked with honeyed figs. But step behind the curtain and the real inventory reveals itself. Women with names that aren't theirs and stories they don't bother to remember anymore. They speak Ladino, Greek, Arabic, sometimes broken French. Mariam knows them all. She's part madam, part dock captain. She decides who stays, who sails, who sinks. Port cities are different, she tells you. In Istanbul, everything is shadowed. Careful. Here, it's fast, raw. You don't have time to build a reputation. You just have to survive until next Friday's ship. That afternoon, she takes you on a walk through the alleys behind the harbour, where stray cats and broken men lounge side by side in the heat. She points out the houses. This one for sailors, that one for Europeans, this one only for women who can sing. Everyone has a market, she says. You just have to know what kind of buyer is coming. It's here, more than anywhere else, that you start to see the empire's borderlands for what they are. Elastic. There's no strict order. Laws bend. Identities blur. The women here shift between roles daily. Dancer, maid, priest's niece, perfumer, concubine, sometimes all in the same week. Historical fact. Port cities like Izmir, Salonika and Alexandria were known for their cosmopolitan cultures and relaxed moral oversight. Prostitution in these cities was often more visible and less regulated, especially in European and Levantine quarters where Ottoman control was limited or tactically ignored. Fringe fact? In Alexandria, local authorities allegedly allowed brothels to operate tax-free as long as they reported any foreign troublemakers who passed through. It turned these establishments into both pleasure houses and unofficial surveillance posts. The academic debate over these port cities tends to split along one line. Were they liberating or just more efficient in their exploitation? Some argue that women had more autonomy in cities like Izmir, more ability to set terms, change clients, leave. Others insist that the faster pace only meant faster erasure. When something went wrong, you disappeared and no one ever asked where. Back in Mariam's house, the women tell stories between customers. One girl, Noura, says she used to dance at a tavern near the docks. One night, a sailor handed her a coin and a map. He said he was taking me to Venice, and she laughs. Then he left me at a fish market with a basket of rotten lemons. She still keeps the coin tucked into her shoe, as a joke, as proof. Another girl, Esme, arrived from Cyprus after her village burned. She speaks 3 languages, plays the tambour, and has a laugh that makes men believe things they shouldn't. She says she likes the port. It's honest, everyone here wants something and doesn't bother pretending otherwise. You believe her. No one here is hiding. They're just moving constantly through deals, borders, identities. That night, a storm blows in, thick with thunder and hot rain. The house leaks in 3 places. A few men still come, soaked and shivering, drunk enough not to care. One pays Esme just to sing. He sits by the window listening, crying silently into his cup. He says nothing when he leaves. After midnight, you help Mariam nail shut one of the leaky windows. She asks if Istanbul feels far away. You say yes. Good, she says. Istanbul remembers too much. This place forgets. It's easier. The next day you arrive in Alexandria, where the wind smells of cumin and memory. The streets are wide, the light more golden. Here the brothels are tucked between Coptic churches and Turkish baths. The women wear longer dresses, darker veils. There's more caution. More foreign soldiers too, French, British, even a few rogue Italians who claim to be diplomats and act like pigs. You meet a woman named Lale who says she used to work for a pasha's wife in Cairo. Her eyes are sharp, her hands calloused. She says Alexandria is where women go when they've burned their last name behind them. It's a city of ghosts, she says, and no one asks whose. She introduces you to a girl from Damascus, another from Tunis, one who won't say where she's from but hums Serbian lullabies in her sleep. The house is quiet, clean, more rules here, clients by appointment. No one allowed twice in the same week. You ask why. "'Cause need makes people dangerous," Lale says. "Give them too much and they'll think they own you." There's a rhythm to the way women move in these cities, not just in how they walk, but how they talk. Fast, guarded, like every word costs a coin. Their stories are rehearsed. Their eyes flick toward doorways before they answer. Here, trust is a foreign word, and safety isn't a place, instead a person, or a route out. One girl, Yasmin, says she's saving up to buy passage to Marseille. She's been saying it for 3 years. No one believes her, not even her, but she still collects the money, still dreams. Layla once told you that every brothel is a clock and the women inside are the gears. In port cities, though, the clock is cracked. Everything ticks a little faster with more risk and less memory. Time bends differently here, sometimes forward, sometimes nowhere. And yet, in the middle of all this transience, the women survive. They memorize maps of every alley. They learn which ships carry trouble and which carry fools. They know which captains pay well and which don't ask too many questions. You sit by the sea at dusk, watching a woman in a blue shawl help a drunken man onto a boat. She doesn't say goodbye, just takes the coin from his hand, watches him stumble on board, and walks away. By the time he looks back, she's already disappeared into the crowd. That's the rule in port cities, don't look back. You can't afford to. You don't expect the poetry. Not here, not now, not in a house where the walls are thin and the nights are long, and survival feels more urgent than verse. But it comes anyway, soft and sudden, like a ripple across still water. You're sitting in the corner of Layla's parlour, sipping over-steeped tea, when one of the girls, Amina, the quiet one with ink-stained fingers, pulls a folded scrap of paper from her sash and begins to read aloud. Your eyes, two thieves of sleep, steal what the night cannot forgive. The room goes still. Even the oil lamp seems to lean in. She reads the rest slowly, her voice flat but careful, like she's afraid the words might melt if she rushes. The poem is raw, desire wrapped in guilt, softness wrapped in steel. When she finishes, no one claps, no one speaks. They just sit with it for a moment, each one letting it settle. Layla finally breaks the silence. "That from the professor again?" Amina nods. "He left it under my cup, with half his rent." Everyone exhales, and life returns to the room. Turns out the house has a tradition. Poems passed under pillows, scribbled on backs of receipts, whispered between kisses. Not every man who comes here leaves money and bruises. Some leave metaphors. You spend the next few days chasing the trail of verse. Turns out, poetry runs through the brothel like water through a cracked pipe. Not everyone writes it, but everyone remembers it. One girl recites couplets from memory, Persian lines she learned from a man who said he once studied under a dervish. Another has a drawer full of poems she's collected over the years, each folded into a perfect square and labelled by her scent. This one smelled like tobacco, she says. This one like sandalwood. This one like regret. Historical fact. Poetry was deeply embedded in Ottoman culture, not just in courtly life, but among common people. Poets were revered, and poetic expression was a valued form of communication, even in matters of love and politics. It was not unusual for men, even powerful ones, to compose verse for women they admired, desired, or tried to apologise to. Fringe fact, some brothels, particularly upscale ones, became informal salons, places where poets, musicians, and scholars gathered to drink, argue, flirt, and share verse. The boundaries between art and transaction blurred. There's a story, unverified but persistent, about a famed poet who met his muse not in a palace, but in a Galata brothel, where she corrected his metre and broke his heart in the same evening. There's debate about how much of this literary exchange was genuine connection versus performance. Some scholars believe the poems were just currency, part of the seduction, no different from a coin or a compliment. Others argue that these spaces offered a unique kind of emotional honesty, stripped of the social posturing found in more respectable salons. You find evidence of both. Sophia shows you a poem written in French, delicate and formal. The handwriting is beautiful, the sentiment hollow. He gave it to 3 other girls, she says, grinning. I compared notes, but she keeps it anyway. Not because it meant something, but because it didn't. Sometimes fake love is still prettier than real loneliness. Then there's Malik, who writes her own, fierce, unsparing lines about the body, about betrayal, about the strange silence after a man leaves. She doesn't share them easily. But one night, drunk on pomegranate wine and tired of everyone else's stories, she reads a verse aloud that makes the room fall still again. They pay for the curve of my back, not the spine that holds it straight. No one laughs after that. You begin to understand that for these women, poetry isn't just a game or a luxury, it's rebellion. It's the only space where their voices don't need permission, where they can be tender without being punished, where their pain can live in metaphor instead of memory. Layla says she used to write too. Back when I still had things I couldn't say out loud, she jokes, but late one night she pulls out a folded paper from a sewing box, yellowed, smudged with old perfume. She doesn't read it aloud. Just hands it to you. You read it in silence. It's about a girl watching rain drip down a broken roof, dreaming of the sea but unable to name the direction. It's not about sex. It's not about men. It's about absence. About what the city has stolen and never given back. You hand it back carefully. She shrugs. It's old. I'm not that girl anymore. But you don't believe her. Not fully. The next day, Huria shows you a locked drawer in her desk. Inside, letters, clippings, and 2 slim volumes of verse, one published in Izmir, the other in Damascus, both anonymous. She says one of the girls from her house wrote them. She won't say who. You'd be surprised how many of them can write, she says, more than anyone wants to admit. There's a myth in the Empire that these women are blank slates, that they exist only in flesh, that nothing they say is worth listening to unless it's moaned or whispered. But the truth sits folded in drawers, inked onto scraps, hidden between shifts and under pillows. The truth rhymes, the truth bleeds. Even Yusuf, the broker, keeps a little notebook. Not just client names and bribes, but lines he hears. Men talk more poetically when they're guilty, he says. He's not wrong. One night a man brings a lute and asks if any of the girls will sing. Fatma obliges, reluctantly. Her voice is deep and smoky, and she chooses a poem none of you have heard before. It's short, sharp. It sounds like a warning wrapped in a lullaby. Do not touch what you won't remember. Do not name what you plan to forget. After that, no one asks her to sing again. Not out of insult, out of fear they might listen too closely. The next morning you wake up to find a poem tucked under your cup. It's unsigned, simple, just a single line. We are the stories they buy, but never finish. And suddenly everything about this place feels more fragile, more sacred. The work goes on, the clients come and go, but in the quiet corners of this house, poetry lives, written in the spaces between survival, in the ink that smears, in the mouths that can't always speak truth aloud, but still find a way. The first time you see them together, it doesn't look like much. Just a glance across the room, a flash of hesitation, the way one of them holds his breath a little too long. He's a janissary, tall, broad-shouldered, with the stiff kind of posture that comes from years of discipline and never being allowed to rest. His uniform is faded but clean, the curved scimitar at his hip glinting as he walks. His name is Halil, though no one calls him that. Around here, he's just the guard, and until now you've only ever seen him as background, leaning against doorways, poking near the entrance, tossing coins to street dogs. The girl is Maliki, 17, maybe 18, quick with her words, sharper with her eyes. You've heard her tease merchants in 4 languages and pocket extra change without a second glance. She's the kind who makes survival look like theatre, light-hearted, effortless, a kind of glittering refusal to die. But tonight, there's none of that sparkle. She's sitting by the window, silent, her fingers twisting the end of her braid. He walks past, nods once. She doesn't return the gesture, just watches him with a look that's hard to read. Soft, but firm. Familiar. Layla notices. Of course she does. She doesn't say anything, just raises one eyebrow at you as if to say, so, they've finally stopped pretending. Later that evening, you find the two of them in the courtyard. Not touching, not smiling, just sitting close enough that their knees almost meet. He's talking quietly. She's listening, but not the way a girl listens to a client. She's leaning in, focused, like she's memorizing each word. Then she says something that makes him laugh. A short, surprised sound, the kind you can't fake. He reaches for her hand. She doesn't pull away. You tell Layla what you saw, but she doesn't look surprised. They think no one knows, she says, lighting a pipe. It won't last. Why not? Because love here is too expensive. Historical fact. Janissaries, elite soldiers of the Ottoman Empire, were often stationed in cities like Istanbul and tasked with policing, guarding important properties, and sometimes enforcing moral decrees. While they were supposed to be celibate and fully devoted to the state, many took lovers or even secret wives. Relations with sex workers were technically forbidden, but rarely uncommon. Fringe fact, one janissary was once expelled from his post not for frequenting brothels, which many did, but for refusing to pay a madam's protection fee. He called the place holy in its own way. That didn't sit well with the magistrate. Debate still lingers over whether such relationships were transactional, protective, or something more complicated. Some scholars argue that janissaries often formed deep emotional bonds with women in brothels, acting as de facto guardians or patrons. Others suggest the relationships were inherently exploitative, imbalanced by the ever-present threat of violence or exposure. Whatever this is between Halil and Melike, it's not simple. You begin to see it in the way she prepares for him, brushing her hair differently, choosing a lighter scarf, wearing perfume only he's commented on. He, in turn, lingers longer at the door, takes his meals outside, stares a little too long into the lamp when she's near. They don't speak in front of others, but when they're alone, it's as if the rest of the world dims. You ask Layla if she's worried. I'm always worried, she says, especially when a girl forgets the line between a lover and a liar. Still, she doesn't stop it. She watches, waits. Then one night, Malika vanishes. She's gone before dawn. Her room empty, her bedding folded. The scarf Halil once bought her left hanging from a nail by the window. Everyone panics, but quietly. Huria sends boys to the docks, the taverns, the guards' quarters. Nothing. No one's seen her. Halil doesn't come back that day, or the next. By the third day, the whispers start. She ran away with him. She was sold again. She jumped in the Bosphorus. No one agrees, everyone assumes. Then just as suddenly she returns, alone. She walks through the front door just before dusk. Her dress damp, her shoes missing, her eyes glassy. She doesn't speak, just sits down in the middle of the floor, pulls a slice of bread from the table and eats in silence. Layla kneels beside her. What happened? Malika chews, swallows, stares ahead. He changed his mind. No one asks more. They've heard it before. Not with those words, not from that man. But the meaning is always the same. He promised her something. Escape. Safety. Maybe even marriage. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. But in the end, something shifted. He left. Or told her to go, or simply stepped aside and let the world do what it always does. She sleeps in the kitchen that night. No one moves her. The next morning, she's back in her usual place, teasing clients, flipping coins. The sparkle's back almost, but it doesn't reach her eyes. Layla says nothing for a long time then. Love's not forbidden here. It's just fatal. You ask why the girls still fall for it. 'Cause sometimes, she says, it's the only thing we're not charging for. You begin to notice other quiet bonds. A baker who always brings an extra loaf. A musician who leaves his coin but never stays. A woman in the neighbourhood who sends scarves without a name. All these tiny gestures, stitched together like prayers against a tide. Melika doesn't speak of Halil again. When another guard appears at the door 2 weeks later, she doesn't look at him, just walks past holding a tray of tea, smiling like nothing inside her was ever broken. But when she thinks no one's watching, she still touches the edge of that scarf, folded, washed, and hidden in the drawer she never locks. Because love in this world is not a fairy tale. It doesn't rescue you. It doesn't end in gardens or grand halls. Here, love is a bruise that fades slower than all the rest. You first hear about her in a tavern. An older man, eyes glassy with reiku, mumbling toward a bowl of stewed chickpeas. He's talking to no one. Or maybe everyone. She owned half the block, I tell you, Circassian. Kin like ivory. Built her empire one coin at a time. You lean in, ask her name. He slurs something that might be Farid or Farah, or maybe just a wish. But when you ask Layla later, she doesn't hesitate. You mean Madame Gulnaz? Then she pours tea like you have just summoned a ghost. Every house has its stories, and Gulnaz's is carved into the floorboards of at least a dozen of them. She was once a slave, born somewhere in the Caucasus, sold into Istanbul around the age of 10. The records don't mention her parents, or her real name, or even the house that first claimed her, but every girl here knows the legend. She worked her way out of bondage, not by begging or running, but by learning. Languages, temperaments, men. Gulnaz became a fixture in the older district of Balat, first a girl, then a madam, then something far more rare. A woman with land, employees, connections, and protection. When you ask what kind of protection, Layla just says, enough to make the guards bow. Historical fact. In the Ottoman Empire, certain former slaves, particularly women brought from the Caucasus, Central Asia, or the Balkans, could, through a mix of patronage, skill, and sheer force of will, rise to significant power. This was especially true for women in urban centres, where the informal economy offered paths unavailable in more structured roles. Fringe fact? According to one 19th century police record, a Circassian madam was fined for interfering with public authority after bribing 2 officers to investigate a rival's establishment. The fine was waived within a week. Rumours claimed the madam threatened to expose several elite clients by name. She never had to threaten anyone again. Some scholars argue that women like Gulnaz represented the closest thing to social mobility available to enslaved women. Others insist that her story is the exception, not the rule, a convenient myth sold to girls to keep them believing the ladder is real. But the empire, for all its rigidity, has cracks, and sometimes women crawl through them and build thrones from what they find on the other side. You hear more of Gulnaz as the days pass, from Huriye, who says she once worked for her, from a merchant in the bazaar who swears she still owns 3 properties under different names, from a girl named Zeliha who once delivered her linens. She smelled like power, Zelia says, and something sweeter underneath. You want to meet her, but that's not how it works, so you settle for tracing her steps. You walk past the old house in Balat, a crumbling white building with iron grills over the windows and a garden gone wild with ivy. The neighbours don't say her name, but their silence confirms everything. One woman spits when you ask. One man shrugs and says, "She kept the streets cleaner than the mayor ever did." The house is empty now, or looks that way, but someone still lights a candle in the window at dusk. Back at Layla's, the girls argue over whether she's still alive. Some say she left for Cairo, started over. Others say she's dead but left instructions. Layla's the only one who met her more than once. She didn't smile much, she says, but when she did, you felt it in your knees. According to Layla, Gulnaz did more than run a house. She brokered truces between rival madams, set prices, established rules, no girls under 13, no clients with military titles unless pre-approved, clean bedding, proper meals, and most importantly, discretion. She ran it like a palace, Layla says, but with sharper knives. And yes, she owned property, not just brothels but warehouses, vineyards, a bathhouse in Galata that still pretends to be respectable. She used men the way they used her, took their favours, their secrets, their money, and built something they couldn't destroy, but eventually she disappeared. One day she was there, and the next, the house closed. The women were moved to other houses, the ledgers vanished, the guards stopped asking questions. Maybe she got tired, Huriye offers. Or maybe, says Sophia, she finally found somewhere she didn't have to fight. You sit with that for a while, because the idea that a woman like her could just leave, that's the kind of story people rarely tell. In most endings here, the women fade or fall, but Gulnaz, she vanished like smoke, on her own terms. Malika says she wants to be her someday, build her own house, set her own rules. You'll need 5 lives and a silver tongue, Layla says. Malika just grins. I've already got one. I'll find the rest. That night, someone pins a small note to the main door, no signature. Just a line of poetry. She built her home from ash and silk, and no one ever dared knock it down. Layla finds it in the morning and pockets it without a word. You ask her if she wrote it. She doesn't answer. Instead, she starts sweeping the courtyard, eyes distant, mouth curved just slightly. Like maybe she's thinking of someone, or maybe she's thinking about what comes next. You realise something then, for all the pain and exploitation, the Empire never really knew what to do with women who didn't break, women who climbed instead of crumbling. Women who learn to smile like strategy and walk like they'd already bought the street beneath their feet. And somewhere, maybe in Cairo, maybe in the hills near Bursa, maybe right here behind one of these shuttered windows, Madame Gulnaz is still alive, still watching, still waiting to be remembered. It starts with the dogs howling, not one or two, dozens. The kind that usually sleep in alleys or curl beneath fruit carts in the shade, suddenly upright and barking into the darkness like something's coming they can feel in their bones. And they're not wrong, because by morning the streets are different. Quieter, edgier, a little too clean. You step outside and notice it immediately. The usual shouting from the butcher's stall is missing. The coffee cellar near the well doesn't meet your eyes. A woman selling figs hisses at her daughter to cover her face, something she's never done before. Then you round the corner and see why. The red paint on the door is fresh, not blood, real paint, thick, wet, streaked downwards like it was slathered on with haste and anger. You've seen it before once during the last sweep. It's a mark, an accusation, an invitation. This house is unclean. You hurry back to Layla's. By the time you return, word has already arrived. A new inspector, sent from the palace, well-dressed, well-connected, and hell-bent on moral rehabilitation. He's not like the others, doesn't take bribes, doesn't flirt, doesn't look the girls in the eye. He comes with a list, a decree, a team of men in crisp caftans with sharp shoes and sharper gazes. And one by one the houses begin to vanish. Not slowly, not with ceremony, just gone. Overnight, doors nailed shut, curtains torn down, girls marched into carriages like criminals, some released later, some not. Layla's house isn't hit first, but it's coming. Everyone knows it. Hourier has already started packing ledgers. Sophia burns the older account books in the courtyard fire. The youngest girls are moved out, sent to safer places, seamstresses' shops, bathhouses, distant cousins with loose rules. No one wants them seen here when the officials come. You can't stop it, you ask Layla. She just exhales smoke. No, but we can choose what they don't take. Historical fact. Multiple crackdowns on prostitution took place during the 19th century Ottoman Empire, particularly under the influence of Tanzimat reforms and increasing European pressure to clean up cities like Istanbul. These purges were often violent and inconsistent, driven more by public performance than long-term policy. Fringe fact, in one recorded case, a brothel in the Galata district was demolished in the middle of the night, its foundation torn out and salted. Supposedly, the inspector in charge had once been rejected by a girl who worked there. Justice, it seems, wore a very thin mask. There's endless debate among historians about whether these crackdowns were sincere efforts at moral reform or politically motivated attempts to appease religious conservatives and European observers. Many argue that they simply displaced sex work to more hidden and dangerous corners of the city without ever solving anything. And that's exactly what happens now. The streets don't get quieter. They just go underground. Within days, the public houses are shut, but whispers spread of new rooms in bathhouses, of reading salons that never loan a single book. In Galata, one enterprising woman opens a lace-making collective with no looms and 10 beds. The work continues, but now it wears a different face, one with less light and more danger. At Layla's, the girls continue to pretend. Dinners are still cooked. Floors are still scrubbed. But everyone speaks softer, like the walls have grown ears. Even Yusuf, the broker, stops coming by. Too hot, he says. Tell the girls I'll be back when the dust settles. You ask where the girls go when the house shuts. Some go home, says Sophia, though her tone makes it clear that's wishful thinking. Some get married to men who pretend they didn't meet them here. Some start again, different name, different city, and the rest? The rest disappear. Melik is quieter than usual. She doesn't joke, doesn't argue. Just walks from room to room, checking windows, mending scarves, looking at everything like it's already lost. One night she asks you if the girls in the palace ever face this kind of fear. You tell her no, not like this. Then what's the difference between a concubine and a whore? She asks. You don't have an answer she'll believe. Layla starts sending girls away in pairs. Zelia goes to Kadikoy. Amina is taken in by a musician who owes Layla a favour. Fatma insists on staying. Someone has to keep the tea warm, she says, but you see her packing at night when she thinks no one is looking. One by one, the room's empty. Then one morning, it's Layla who disappears. You wake up to find her bed neatly made, a single hairpin left on the pillow. No note, no whisper, just gone. Huria sits in the front room, stone-faced, and announces she's now in charge until the end. That night, the inspectors come. They don't yell, they don't break anything, they just walk in, hand over a paper, and begin measuring the rooms, counting exits, noting the ages of the girls still there. Huria says nothing, offers tea. One of them accepts, no one is arrested. Not yet, but the paper says you have 5 days. After that, the building is to be vacated, its contents seized, its name erased. You sit with Huria in the courtyard after they leave. "What'll you do?" you ask. "Move," she says simply, like always. But where? Where they haven't ruined yet. In the final days, the girls stop pretending. Meals go uneaten. Beds remain cold. Even the walls seem to creak with grief. The house, once noisy with laughter and argument and music, now sounds like a tomb or a memory. On the last night, Melik paints a red line above the doorway, like a warning or a signature. "This place was ours," she says, "even if they won't remember it." And you know she's right. The city won't remember the names, the faces, the laughter. It will remember the raids, the reforms, the moral victories, but not the lives erased to make room for them. You stay until dawn, then walk away, and behind you the house exhales its last breath. You find them scattered like seeds in the wind, some planted, some still drifting, some buried too deep to bloom again. The girls, the madams, the ghosts of Layla's house. They haven't disappeared, not entirely. They have just moved sideways, into new skins, new corners, new disguises so flimsy they flutter in the light but still manage to hold. You start with Fatma, now working in a hammam on the edge of Egypt. She scrubs bodies with the same diligence she once used to mix tea, her hands calloused from hours in steam and lye. She doesn't talk about the house unless you ask, and when you do, she just says, "It was soft while it lasted." She tells you she likes the bathhouse. "No men to pretend for," she says. "Just sweat and silence." Then you hear that Sophia's in Kadikoy, passing herself off as a widow. She runs a tiny bookshop that somehow never sells a single book. A few girls live in the back, helping her with inventory. She smiles when you visit, pours wine in mismatched cups, and tells you the story of a Frenchman who bought the Iliad just so he'd have an excuse to flirt. "He quoted Homer," she says, rolling her eyes. "I told him I preferred Hesiod. He blinked like I slapped him." It's easier to laugh here. The air's lighter, the curtains cleaner. But when you ask if she's happy, she shrugs. Happiness wasn't in the contract. You catch word of Zelia working in a tailor's shop, threading needles so fine she can do it blind. They say she sings as she sews, little lullabies from her mother's village. She hasn't spoken about the red door since it was painted. Refuses to pass by that street. Then there's Melik. She's harder to track. Rumours say she left Istanbul entirely. Some say she went north. Some say she followed a trader to Damascus. One girl swears she saw her in a coffee house in Bursa, laughing with a man who wore velvet gloves even in the heat. You think about the scarf, the silence, the way she mumbled with her mouth but never her eyes. Maybe she's still running. Or maybe she finally stopped. Historical fact. After government purges or crackdowns, many Ottoman sex workers disappeared into other trades. Some became laundresses, midwives or bath attendants. Others tried their luck in distant cities, often changing names and identities to outrun the stain of their past. Fringe fact. An 1851 police record mentions a reformed woman of ill repute who ran a tea garden for nearly a decade, secretly employing other former sex workers. No brothel signs, no red sashes, just quiet transactions under flowering trees and pots of mint tea. There's fierce academic debate about how much agency these women truly had after leaving the trade. Some insist many successfully rebuilt lives, especially with help from wealthier patrons or allies. Others argue that without the protection of a house, most were simply reabsorbed into new systems of exploitation, just without the name. You visit Huria last. She now lives in a small apartment above a dry goods shop. Staff, no girls, just her and a row of jars, lentils, figs, walnuts. Tiny sugar cubes that glint in the light like teeth. She's aged 10 years and 3, the rings on her fingers are gone. The kohl around her eyes has been replaced by fine lines that run deeper than paint ever could. But when she sees you, she smiles. A real one. "Did you expect me to die in that house?" she asks, chuckling as she waves you in. "No," you say. "I expected you to open 5 more. Zimmer, she pours coffee without asking, just like always. You sit in her tiny kitchen, knees almost touching. The kettle hisses softly on the fire. She tells you that Layla sent word. She's somewhere near Izmir running a vineyard, or maybe running a brothel disguised as a vineyard. Hard to tell. Either way, the wine's good. The girls are safe. The clients, apparently, are mostly French and entirely deluded. You ask if she misses it. The house, the life. Huria takes a long sip before answering. I miss the noise, she says. The rhythm. The girls fighting over bath time and the lies men told and the way we let them think we believe them. Then quieter. But I don't miss wondering who'll knock at the door at midnight with a badge and no mercy. You ask if she'd ever start another house. She shakes her head. Not in this city. It's changed. And you know what she means. Since the purge, Istanbul has grown more watchful. The alleys don't feel the same, even the brothels that survived because someone paid or someone begged, or someone belonged to someone too powerful to touch or smaller, dimmer, muted. Desire hasn't left, but it's been forced into costume. The Empire still wants what it always wanted, it just wants it to pretend harder. Before you go, Huria hands you a small box. Inside, a velvet pouch of coins, a folded note written in Layla's hand and a silver hairpin you've seen before. She said to give you this, Huria says. Said you were part of the story, whether you liked it or not. The note is short. Just a line, really. What they burn, we rebuild, slower, louder, in the places they forget to watch. You walk home with the box tucked under your arm, heart a little heavier and a little more sure of itself, because the girls are still here, changed, hidden, renamed, but not erased. And somewhere out there, behind a curtain in a tea shop or inside a room above a bathhouse, or in the back corner of a bookshop that smells faintly of rosewater and dust, and a woman is laughing at something a man just said, counting coins under the table and remembering the words to a poem she once whispered in the dark. The archives are colder than expected, both in temperature and in tone. You've traded the warmth of flickering oil lamps and whispered laughter for stone walls, high ceilings, and the crisp rustle of papers that haven't been touched in years. The Imperial Library smells like damp leather and ink dried too long ago to matter. No perfume here, no jasmine, no trace of the women you're looking for, but you came here for a reason. Somewhere inside this vast collection of scrolls, tax ledgers and court documents lies the trail you've been following. Not the house, not Layla, not the women themselves, but the story. The record, the version someone bothered to write down. You've spent 3 days combing through documents labelled with stiff, proper titles like moral oversight reports, urban regulation ledgers, and the ever-charming Register of Female Disorderly Persons, 1843. The ink is sharp, the handwriting tidy, but the names are smudged. The stories reduced to codes and fines and abrupt notes like removed, relocated, or the coldest of all, irretrievable. That word shows up often, irretrievable, like these women were lost objects, misplaced property, broken lamps. You find one entry that catches your eye. House at corner of Tophane district, led by woman L. Frequent complaints, no official permit, 2 minors, action taken, confiscation executed without resistance. No names, no full address. Just initials and punishment. You know what house that is. Historical fact. Ottoman administrative records kept meticulous logs of suspected or confirmed brothels, often under vague labels. These documents served as evidence in tax courts and moral investigations, though they rarely recorded personal details, especially not those of the women involved. Fringe fact, in a corner of the Başbakanlık Osmanlı Arşivi, a dusty imperial archive rarely seen by outsiders, there exists a single ledger with annotations believed to be written by a high-ranking official's personal scribe. Several of the notations include lines of poetry, discreet commentary, and one chilling remark. This girl sings like grief on fire. Pity the men who believe her. Historians argue whether these bureaucratic documents reveal society's deep-seated misogyny, or merely reflect the system's impersonal structure. Some claim these entries are the only record these women have. Others insist they are the final insult, documents that erase their voices under the pretense of recording them. You close the ledger and realise something. The women are never centred in these records. They are background, a footnote to the behaviour of men. No one wrote down what colour scarf Zaliha wore. No one mentioned how Sophia leaned forward when she argued. No one cared that Malik once painted her nails with crushed berries and made jokes sharp enough to slice shame in half. Instead, you get tallies, numbers, how many windows, how much gold, how many arrests. You sit in a room surrounded by centuries of silence. Then you meet Daria. She's the archivist, mid-40s, glasses slipping down her nose. With a stack of forbidden knowledge under her arm and an air of quiet rebellion. She's been watching you leaf through papers for days and finally decides to speak. "You're not a student," she says. "No," you admit. "Not a researcher either." "No." "So what are you?" You think for a moment. "I'm looking for the parts they didn't write down." She smiles at that. "Then you're exactly where you should be." Daria takes you to a back room, not part of the official records, not even listed in the index. Just a drawer marked Miscellaneous Correspondence, Moral Inquiries. Inside are dozens of folded notes, complaints, statements scrawled in haste. One smells faintly of rosewater. Another has a dried lavender stem tucked inside. Most are unsigned. One reads, "They treat us as ghosts until they need something to touch." Another, "If speaking the truth is vulgar, then we are queens of vulgarity." You realise these are letters, fragments from women who wrote into the Empire's bureaucracy not with fear but defiance. They weren't just being recorded, they were responding. One girl writes to a magistrate demanding her earnings be returned after a client refused to pay and later denounced her. She signs the letter only with a monogram, M. Another girl, clearly educated, accuses a local official of exploiting her and then punishing her for the same. She ends the letter. "History is your tool, but I am not your ink." You're stunned. You ask Daria where she found them. "They were going to be burned," she says, "filed under irrelevance." She doesn't say more. She doesn't have to. You spend hours copying them, not because you plan to publish them or turn them into anything, just to have them, just so you to remember. At one point you find a note scribbled on the back of a confiscation notice. It's not official, not formal. Just a line in an unfamiliar hand. She looked at me and I wanted to believe I was more than a customer. Who wrote it? A clerk? A guard? A man who came in for pleasure and left with something worse? Remorse? There's no answer. Just the echo of it, quiet as a whisper in a shuttered room. Before you leave, Daria hands you one last item. It's not a document. It's a small, worn book of poetry, no cover, no title, just pages. Inside you recognise a few lines, Melik's, Layla's. Even that note once pinned to the door, someone kept them. They were never anonymous to each other, Daria says, just to the people who didn't care to ask. You thank her. She nods, waves you off, already disappearing into another drawer of lost things. And as you walk back into the city, sun dipping low over the Bosphorus, you feel the weight of their voices pressed against your ribs. Girls who were never supposed to be remembered, who survived anyway, and wrote it down just in case someone someday decided they mattered. You return to the street where it all began, expecting it to be smaller somehow, faded maybe, reduced by time. But it isn't. If anything, it feels larger, as if the silence that's taken its place has only deepened its echo. The building's still there, of course. They never tore it down. That would require acknowledgement. Instead, the windows have been boarded, the garden overtaken by weeds, and a sign has been nailed to the front in crooked script. Property of the municipality. Trespassers will be prosecuted. You press your hand to the door not to open it, but to feel the ghost of warmth still pulsing beneath the wood. This house had a heart once. Now it's a ribcage, locked and quiet. But that's the thing about stories, they never really stay put. They drift, they echo, they live in places you don't expect. And Layla's house may be gone, but the stories, they're everywhere. You hear one whispered in the market by an old man selling sesame bread. He tells a young boy not to loiter near the corner house. "Once belonged to a woman who cursed men with her eyes," he says. "All of them came back ruined." He laughs, but his hands shake when he counts change. At a cafe by the water, a woman with a lace veil reads aloud from a book of poetry. She won't say where the lines came from, only that her mother taught them to her. You recognise one of the verses, "We carry their names until ours bleed through." In a weaving shop, a girl with ink on her hands sells scarves patterned with red sashes. "Old Ottoman design," she says with a wink, "for women who walk where they please." And so the story survives, not in ledgers or archives, but in fabric and rhythm, in rumours and looks, passed woman to woman like a secret or a spell. Historical fact, After the fall of major Ottoman brothel districts, many of the properties were quietly repurposed. Some became workshops, some became schools, a few were abandoned entirely. Officials rarely acknowledged their history. If anything, they scrubbed it clean with bureaucracy and cement. But the locals always remembered. Fringe fact, in one documented instance, a former brothel in Galata was converted into a girls' orphanage. According to urban folklore, the headmistress would find notes tucked into the walls, verses, names, scraps of cloth. She never reported them. She simply collected them into a box and left it with the next headmistress. The box still exists, supposedly locked in a cabinet in the school's attic. The scholars still argue about whether these women were ever truly part of the Empire's story or just a footnote scribbled at the edge. Some insist they were victims, others say survivors, a few say rebels, but none of those titles quite fit. What they were was constant, like the city itself, bent, but not broken. You stop by Sophia's shop again just to see her. She's rearranging the shelves, her fingers covered in charcoal from a half-written letter. She's teaching one of the girls to read between customers. It's not enough to survive, she says. You have to know how to name what they try to take from you. She shows you a stack of journals, bound with thread and care. Inside, pages and pages of testimony, observations, tiny sketches and bits of overheard conversation. Each entry signed only with a single initial. They leave them here when they don't know where else to leave them, she says. And you realise what she's building, an archive of her own. Not for the historians, for the girls. They say we were never part of history, she says, so we're writing ours where they can't erase it. You ask if she's heard from Melik. She nods once. She sent a scarf and a name. Then, after a pause, she married a poet. You laugh, startled. Willingly. She says she made him swear never to write about her, so naturally he writes about her constantly. There's a kind of hope in that. You leave the shop and follow the old streets past the mosque, the school, the spot where the vendors used to sell fried fish from makeshift grills. The city hasn't changed, not really. It just tells a different story now, louder, more pious, less willing to remember, but you do. You remember the sound of laughter behind closed doors. The rustle of silk skirts on stone, the clink of coins and the poetry folded like prayers. You remember Layla standing in the doorway with a candle, watching the night as if it owed her something. You remember Fatma's song, Hurriyeh's warnings, Amine's quiet eyes. You remember the way they looked when they thought no one was watching, tired maybe, but never defeated. And you carry their names now, not because you were told to, but because you know what happens when no one does. You know how quickly silence becomes erasure. You find yourself writing them down in notebooks, sketching the courtyard from memory, repeating verses in your head at night. You become the echo, the archive, the continuation. You aren't the first, you won't be the last. Because somewhere, right now, there is another house, another girl learning how to walk in a room full of men without giving herself away. Another madam pouring tea while reading the city like a map of shifting loyalties. Another voice scribbling lines of resistance into the margins of a receipt. They are still here, and the Empire may pretend not to see them, but the walls do, the streets do, the stories do, and you do. And now the house stands behind your eyes. Not the real one, not the building swallowed by ivy and forgotten by city records, but the one you carry, whole and humming, its rooms preserved in memory like pressed flowers between pages. You can walk its halls in your sleep, hear the creak of the floor outside Sophia's room, smell the rose water and copper of the bath, feel the afternoon sunlight curling against the patterned tiles in the courtyard where Melike once danced barefoot, just to annoy Huria. The Empire has moved on. New governors, new inspectors, new excuses. The brothel districts of Istanbul have been renamed, their sins rewritten, their scars paved over. The streets you once knew now boast polite signage and cleaner facades, but you know what lies beneath. You've walked the seams between what is remembered and what's designed to be forgotten. You hear a new rumour. A small town along the Aegean coast. A woman running a bathhouse where the women are trained in massage, conversation and poetry recitation. Clients must leave their real names at the door and their shame outside. The business is registered under the name Gulnaz Limited. No one can confirm if it's the real Gulnaz or Layla, or just someone keeping the names alive. You think of that bathhouse sometimes, especially at Abunir, and wonder if it's real. If the girls laugh like they used to. If someone still sits up late to pour wine into chipped glasses and talk about the best lies men tell themselves. You hope so. Historical fact. By the turn of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire's approach to sex work had shifted once again, caught between legal reform, European moral influence, and a growing medicalisation of the body. Brothels were briefly regulated, taxed and licensed, only to be criminalised again years later. The women moved accordingly, reshaping their roles in quieter, subtler forms. Fringe fact: there's mention in one traveller's journal from 1910 of a house of forgotten women somewhere in the hills of western Anatolia, part refuge, part school, part rebellion. He claims he was turned away at the door by a girl with a sword tattoo on her wrist who told him, "We've been seen enough." That place was never officially recorded, but the story passed from mouth to mouth until it became myth, which, of course, is its own kind of preservation. The scholars continue to argue, was Ottoman prostitution a tragedy of circumstance, a clever manipulation of power, a hidden economy? They pick over the numbers, compare court documents, debate footnotes, but you know what they're missing. They never heard the laughter. Never stood in the hallway as Sophia read a poem too sharp for paper. Never saw Layla bargain with a judge without raising her voice. Never watched Melike touch the red sash on her dresser and smile like it meant more than silk. This wasn't just survival, it was its own culture, its own city, hidden beneath the city everyone else knew. It still exists, in pieces. You find a girl in a tram station who hums a lullaby you heard once in Hourier's kitchen. You see a drawing in a gallery, unsigned, just the outline of a woman resting her chin on her knees, eyes closed, walls around her etched in charcoal. You find a necklace in a street market that matches one Amin used to wear, 3 coins strung together with black thread. The vendor doesn't know where it came from. They don't need to, because you do. You visit a small museum in Thessaloniki one summer, and in a dim corner of a textile exhibit, you find an old advertisement, handwritten, delicate, in both Ottoman Turkish and Ladino. It's for a ladies' literary salon and clothing repair, promising discretion, comfort, and an evening of verses exchanged in confidence. No address, just a symbol, a red sash drawn in careful ink. You stare at it for a long time, and when you finally leave, you realise something's shifted. You no longer think of these women as gone, not really. They've been here all along, between lines, beneath headlines, living not in tombstones or textbooks, but in gestures and glances. In laughter shared between girls across a quiet room. In the way someone adds too much cardamom to her tea because that's how Layla used to make it. In the scar on a woman's ankle that matches the one you once traced with your eyes in the low candlelight of a brothel long vanished. You're not here to mourn them anymore. You're here to carry them forward. When you walk through the city now, you see them at every turn, in doorways, on rooftops, in the women selling oranges and the ones reading poetry to no one in particular, in the grandmothers who straighten their backs when men interrupt, in the girls with eyes too tired for their age and a stubbornness that won't soften. They are not ghosts, they are inheritance, and you are part of that, whether you ask to be or not. So you write it down, not just the facts, not just the names. You write the way their rooms smelled in spring, you write the colour of Malike's earrings. You write how Layla's voice cracked when she said, "This place was ours." You write the poem you found folded under your cup, the one that still sits in your coat pocket, creased and stained, and too precious to read out loud. You write it all, because they lived, because they mattered, because they still do. So now, as the city quiets outside your window, and the night wraps itself around your shoulders like a familiar shawl, you sit back and let the weight of it all settle. The names, the silk, the verses, the red sashes and whispered prayers, and the slow, deliberate defiance of women who refused to vanish just because history tried to forget them. You remember what it felt like, stepping through that hidden door into Layla's house, not yet knowing what you were walking into, the smell of jasmine and bread, the soft rustle of fabric, the laughter that always sounded like it knew something you didn't. You were a guest in their world, and they let you stay, not because they had to, but because, for a moment, you listened, and now you carry them with you. In every story half told, every woman half named, every silence that stretches too long when the question is who lived here. You'll know, you'll remember, the way Fatma sang over tea, the way Sophia tore the pages she didn't trust the world to hold, the way Melika walked away, always on her own terms. Maybe someday someone else will walk these streets and feel the pulse beneath the stones. Maybe they'll hum a verse without knowing why. Maybe they'll ask the right questions and get the wrong answers, and go looking anyway. And when they do, they'll find what you found. Not shame, not pity, but power. Worn soft like old silk. Now, take a breath. Let your eyes drift shut. The Empire will wait till morning. The girls are resting now. The lamps are low. The curtains sway in a breeze that smells faintly of cardamom and memory. And somewhere in a forgotten room, a woman is still laughing.